Hey guys, howdy, I hope you are fine. As you seen in the thumbnail, in this video, we are gonna see, what if Harry Potter accidentally time traveled with Luna? I request you to check the author of this fanfic, and show some love and support. Name of the story is The Divinations Teacher by Fairy WM. Do check it out. All details in description, and if you want next part of this series, please leave a like and comment 5 blue emoji. Let's get into the video. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry x Daenerys Targaryen uncensored spicy version, link in description. Harry Potter was sitting at the Gryffindor table looking at the staff table at the new divination teacher. She looked vaguely familiar. She was tall and blonde and had large luminous eyes. She wasn't listening to the headmaster who was just finished droning on about the rules and the Dementors and was about to introduce her. She was staring at the stars in the ceiling. "Who is that?" he asked Hermione, who was paying rapt attention to the old man. "If you wait a moment, Headmaster Dumbledore is about to tell us," she said, shushing him. "And now, I regret to inform you that Professor Trelawney has chosen to depart from Hogwarts. In her place, we extend a warm welcome to Professor Ivory Moonblossom," Dumbledore announced, applauding as he turned to face the tall, blonde woman. Ivory Moonblossom rose gracefully from her seat, her bright eyes sweeping over the assembled students. "Good evening," she began, her voice soft and ethereal. "I must ask your forgiveness in advance, as this year will prove challenging for many of you, and I suspect I may not be the most popular professor." With that, she quietly resumed her seat, her gaze drifting dreamily back to the enchanted ceiling. The students immediately began whispering and gossiping among themselves, their voices growing louder and more animated. The chatter only subsided when the headmaster struck his wand against the table with a sharp bang. "Well, let us hope that prediction does not come to pass," he said with a cheerful tone. Professor Moonblossom just smiled serenely and stared vacantly at him. "I wonder what she meant by that," Harry said, looking at Hermione and Ron. This was their third year, and it would be his first year in divinations. He had been looking forward to taking the class since it was supposed to be an easy subject. "I don't know, but I hope that she isn't serious," Ron said, thinking that she meant that the class would be hard. "I am sure that means that her class will be difficult," Hermione said. Grateful for it, she had read the book and found it lacking. Perhaps the new teacher would make it more challenging. "I hope you're right," Harry replied, feeling weary of teachers at Hogwarts putting him in danger. It had already happened twice, both times, with the defense against the dark arts teacher, but who knew, maybe the divination professor would be next. "I am positive of it," Hermione said, with great conviction. They finished their meal while chatting about school, then headed to their dorm not long after. The next day, they had their first Nations class and were introduced to a new textbook. Harry immediately noticed that this book was far more challenging than Unfogging the Future. The new text, Seeing the Truth, placed significant emphasis on tarot reading and palmistry, with additional sections devoted to basic clairvoyance. According to its introduction, unless you possess the inner sight, you would have to depend entirely on divination tools to interpret the future. "Take your books out and turn to page 4, the professor stated in her dreamy voice. "We are going to start with palmistry today." She wore a flowing, cream-colored robe made of delicate gauze, complemented by a sheer veil draped elegantly over her head. Her hands were adorned with fingerless lace gloves, and a soft scent of lilacs lingered around her. As the students shuffled and flipped through the pages, Harry, Ron, and Hermione followed the instructions, turning toward each other and examining their palms. They tried to match the descriptions in the textbook with the lines they saw on their own hands, comparing notes and observations as they went. "I see that you're trying to read your own hands, but that won't work. You need to read your partner's hands instead," Professor Moonblossom said as she approached the nearest table, where Lavender and Parvati were seated. She gently took Lavender's hand and examined it. "My dear, you have a tendency toward gossip and can be a bit superficial at times. Still, you possess a good heart and the capacity to change if you wish. Your lines show strong health and promising fortune. You are likely to live a long life and may marry someone wealthy, but if you don't change your ways, you could find yourself in a long, lonely life with someone you do not truly love." She patted the hand and looked at Lavender with a dreamy expression. Lavender looked unsure as to what to say. She did want to marry rich, but she didn't want to live a long, lonely life. She took back her hand and stared at it. Her face was thoughtful. Professor Moonblossom gently took Parvati's hand and examined it closely. You, my dear, she began, will bring great joy to your family. You will marry someone your parents approve of, showing them much respect. Your future holds good health and a long life filled with children. Over time, you'll come to love your husband and find happiness in your life together. With a warm smile, she returned Parvati's hand. Parvati squealed in delight and bounced up and down. It was her dream to make her parents happy. The only reason she was here was because her parents were trying to find her, and her sister, husbands outside of their home country. They were to get an education to make them proud and impress their future husbands. Now, use your books and try to read the person to your right. The professor instructed as she wandered around the room and watched. Ron grabbed Harry's hand and looked at the book. You have a long lifeline and a short fortune line. So, you read going to live a long life but dirt poor, he said, grinning like a fool. That's not quite right, dear. Young Harry here actually has a short lifeline and a long fortune line, the professor said in her airy voice as she gently took Harry's hand. Tracing the lines in the center of his palm, she explained, his life will be filled with danger, but he'll enjoy great wealth and live like royalty. However, his health line is broken, which means he's prone to accidents and injuries. You should really take care, she cautioned, then studied his heart line. You have a fiery temper, and you tend to follow your heart. Your headline and heartline are connected, which suggests you often act without thinking things through. That could lead you into trouble if you're not more careful. She patted H.I.M. on the shoulder and moved on to the next student. She read you, mate, Ron said, grinning at him, though he looked thoughtfully at him. I don't have a temper, Harry protested, getting hot under the collar. I do think about what I'm going to do before I do it. He was upset over his reading. No, you really don't, Hermione said, though she was loath to say it. She didn't want to admit the professor was correct. She thought divination was wonky and didn't want to add credence to it. The last 2 years proved that. That's not fair. Those were extenuating circumstances, Harry stated, folding his arms across his chest. Yeah, it was life or death, Ron said, agreeing with Harry. Here, Harry, read me. He thrust his hand under Harry's nose. All right, Harry said, scrunching up his nose and pushing up his glasses. He peered at the lines on Ron's hand, then at the book. You are going to be rich when you are older, and you are going to live a long life. You are going to have many kids and 2 wives, he finally said, squinting his eyes at the lines. Oh, and you are also hot-headed and prone to fits of jealousy. I'd better not have 2 wives, Ron said, taking back his hand and staring at it. Mum would kill me. He let the rest alone, knowing it was true. I'm sure they won't both be at the same time, Harry said, laughing at him. Divorce is frowned upon in the wizarding world, Harry, Neville said. From the table near them. Grant says that it is better to have your spouse die of mysterious circumstances than to get a divorce. That's barbaric, Hermione said, sniffing at them. That's just the way it is, Neville said with a shrug. He cringed when the professor came up to him and took his hand. Looking at your palm, I can tell you'll enjoy a long, fulfilling life and will be known for your remarkable courage among friends, she said, tracing the lines gently. You'll have 3 children and a wonderful wife, and your days will be marked by abundance and tranquility. She gave his hand a gentle pat before laying it back on the table. Neville stared at his hand in wonder. He was the most cowardly among his peers and he just couldn't see himself being brave. He glared at the teacher for trying to give him false hope. Ron laughed at her and Harry gave his friend a cutting look. He thought that Neville could be brave if he wanted to. Hermione didn't know whether to harumph or cheer. Most of the class was snickering, until Professor Moonblossom looked at them sadly, making them feel guilty. It was then that the bell rang, and they all gathered their books and left. Everyone was talking and gossiping about what the teacher had told them about their future and others. I don't know what to think about this teacher, Harry admitted, glancing down at his palm every so often. The thought of living a short life, even if it meant being wealthy, unsettled him, especially if that life was filled with danger and hardship. I am unsure what to think about her myself, Hermione confessed. She had gone into the classroom thinking that divination was complete bunk. But the teacher had almost changed her mind. I like her, Ron said, beaming at them. Though I don't know about Harry's prediction of my future. I can't have 2 wives. He was still stuck on that. You can always pick the second one first, Harry suggested, nudging the other boy in the ribs. I wouldn't know which one was the second one, Ron said, shrugging his shoulder. He then moved on and started talking about Transfigurations, which was their next class. They had a great class where they learned about the Animagus transformation. They thought that was brilliant, and the Divinations class was mostly forgotten. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the new teacher remained the main topic of conversation throughout the school. Her predictions seemed uncannily accurate, and the way she categorized students sent chills down everyone's spine. Many found her unsettling, and a sense of unease lingered in the corridors. Some students even found themselves missing Professor Trelawney and her wild, improbable prophecies, despite her tendency to forecast a student's death every year. There was one student who felt completely comfortable with the new teacher, Luna Lovegood. She was often seen engaged in animated conversation with Professor Moonblossom, so absorbed in their discussion that they lost track of time and almost missed dinner altogether. Eventually, a house elf had to fetch them both. They arrived at the Great Hall after the meal had already begun, quietly slipping into their respective seats. While everyone noticed Professor Moonblossom's late entrance, Luna managed to return to her spot unnoticed by all. When the meal was almost done, Luna came up to Harry and said, "Hello. Harry Potter, my name is Luna Lovegood. I was instructed by Professor Moonblossom to come and introduce myself." She slipped in between him and Ron and snuggled up to Harry like they were old friends. Harry looked down at the girl like she was a foreign entity. He wasn't sure what to make of her. "Hello," he stuttered. "She told me that you would help keep the bullies at bay," Luna stated, looking at him with large eyes that looked very familiar. Harry looked down into those eyes and knew he'd seen them somewhere before. They looked like the new professor's eyes. The shape and the color were the same. How strange. Could they be related? Then he registered what she said. "You're being bullied?" he asked, glaring around the room like the bullies would show themselves. Luna continued to look at him with her cerulean eyes. "Oh, yes, since I was a first year," she said, nodding her head against his shoulder. "Why are you being bullied?" Hermione wanted to know. She knew what it was like to be picked on, and there was usually a reason. For her, it was because she was smart and read all the time. "I see things that others don't," Luna informed them, looking at something at Hermione's right ear. "For instance, there are nargles around your head. They aren't getting in your brain, because you are far too smart for them, but they are trying," she said, narrowing her eyes at the pesky pests. "What is a nargle?" Hermione asked, her eyes wide. "They are mostly invisible creatures that will get into your brain and make you fuzzy-minded," Luna stated, batting her radish earrings. "These keep them out." "Balderdash," Hermione stated, waving her away. "I have never heard of such a creature." "You hadn't heard about magic until 3 years ago," Harry reminded her gently. "And animagi were new to you until today. Just because something is unfamiliar doesn't mean it isn't real," he added, casting Hermione a disapproving look. He was frustrated by how quickly she dismissed Luna. Just because she didn't understand or agree with her. "So, Harry Potter, will you protect me from the bullies?" Luna asked, looking at him with pleading eyes. "Yeah, Harry, what are you going to do?" Ron asked, looking at him with laughter in his eyes. Harry glanced around, uncertain how things had shifted so quickly. He was only a third year and didn't see himself as particularly strong. But he knew his reputation carried weight among the other students. After all, he was the boy who lived. Maybe it was time to use that to help someone else. "Of course, Luna. You can join our group whenever you like. And I'll do what I can to help. Just so you know, though, I'm not going to get into fights with anyone for you," he replied, gently moving her away from his side. "Oh, goody," she squealed, clapping her hands and getting up. She skipped back to her table and sat with a huge smile on her face. There was already a difference in how people treated her there. They were watching her in a new light. First, she was seen with the new teacher, who freaked them out, and now she was cozying up with the boy who lived. Just what was going on in this school? Ivory Moonblows. Sam sat across from Albus Dumbledore in the headmaster's office. The air was thick with the tension of an unresolved meeting. They were meant to discuss her candid assessments of the students. A topic that had sparked widespread discomfort among faculty and students alike. Although her observations were completely accurate, their truth freaked out everyone. Yet, despite Albus's repeated attempts to admonish her, Ivory simply gazed at him in silence. Her quiet humming filled the room. "My dear Ivory, you have to realize that the children do not need to know everything about themselves," Albus repeated. His hands folded neatly atop the desk. "If you would just focus on teaching them how to read tea leaves, and nothing more, then things would be much simpler for everyone." He offered her a reassuring smile. As if he'd found the perfect solution. Their conversation had dragged on for more than an hour, with neither side making any progress. He didn't have this much trouble with Sybil. And that woman predicted the death of a student every year. This woman simply didn't seem to grasp that her blunt assessments of everyone's personalities were unsettling to those around her. Her uncanny accuracy left no room for doubt. She had told the Weasley twins they would one day become successful shop owners. News that had stunned them, especially since they had only begun to discuss the idea 2 days earlier. The revelation spread quickly throughout the school, leaving everyone buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Ivory had also informed Draco Malfoy that his mother would soon depart for Paris for the remainder of the year, leaving his father behind. On top of that, she claimed his father was bribing the minister to ensure Sirius Black remained imprisoned, allowing him continued access to the Black family's wealth. Draco wasn't sure how much of this was true, but he couldn't shake the feeling that every word she spoke was entirely possible. He had tried to keep the news to himself, but she had spoken it where others heard. Albus was determined to put an end to her predictions before they could incite panic among parents and led them to withdraw their children from the school. While there was no real reason for alarm, he knew that parental reactions were seldom governed by logic. Ivory offered him a gentle smile, humming softly before quietly declaring, "You will not live much longer. Within the next 3 years, you and someone you trust will be the cause of your end." With that, she shifted her attention to Fawkes, stepping closer to the Phoenix and caressing his brilliant feathers. "I beg your pardon," Dumbledore said, shocked at her revelation. He knew she was the real thing, but to have her predict his death so blatantly was astonishing. That, and how did he and someone he trusted have a hand in his demise? That did not make sense. It had to be one or the other, it could not be both. "I'm sorry, did I say something?" Ivory asked, peering at him from under the fringe of her hair. She continued to pet the bird as she glanced at him with inquiring eyes. She knew perfectly well what she had said, but she wasn't going to repeat it. "No, never mind," Dumbledore replied, dismissing the comment with a wave of his hand. He reminded himself that true seers seldom recalled their own prophecies. "Let us return to our discussion. You must stop telling children such unsettling things about themselves. They are still young, and there is no need for them to know every tiny detail about their personalities just yet. In time, they will come to understand these things on their own." He ran a hand down his beard in a grandfatherly fashion, like he was imparting great knowledge. "How can they ever grow if they don't understand how others perceive them?" Ivory questioned, inclining her head so that her long hair spilled gracefully over her right shoulder. "It is part of the growing process. Believe me, children have been doing it for generations without your help. Now, I will not have this conversation with you again," Dumbledore said, standing like the topic was over. "Oh, goody," Ivory said, turning to the door. "I was getting tired of not listening to you." She then left the room and closed the door behind her. The headmaster stared at the door, wondering if he had come out ahead of that conversation or not. HP. Ivory waited for Luna, at the bottom of the staircase just outside the headmaster's office. She'd lingered there specifically for Luna, knowing the little girl would show up whenever she had a break from class. As Luna approached, she tilted her head and asked, "Will you finally tell me how I know you?" "You already know," Ivory said with a knowing wink. "You just don't want to accept it." She gently took Luna's hand, steering her away from the headmaster's office, so he wouldn't overhear their conversation. Ivory was well aware that Dumbledore believed she was a distant relative of Pandora's or the Lovegood families. What he didn't realize was that she was actually from the future. A secret she had every intention of keeping. As long as he continued to think of her as merely a seer, Ivory knew she could protect the truth for a little while longer. Are you my aunt that my mother never heard of? Luna asked in her dreamy voice, as they moved down the hallway towards the divination's classroom. You know that is not so, Ivory stated, swinging their joined hands. Are you a cousin from a faraway land? Luna inquired, skipping along as she continued guessing. She knew she wasn't, but she thought she'd say it anyway. She was too much like her to be anything but her. I have the same accent as you, Ivory pointed out, tapping her nose, like she was being silly. Are you my sister from a different mister? Luna said, then giggled since she had no idea where that came from. Now you are just being ridiculous, Ivory said, thumping her on the top of the head. Your mum wasn't that old, she stated, a bit of sadness in her tone. I know, she admitted with a weary sigh. Luna had already deduced that Ivory was herself from the future, though the reason for her return remained a mystery. Will you tell me why you came back? She asked quietly, keeping her gaze fixed ahead to avoid meeting the other lady's eyes. I cannot, Ivory said, sadly. I can tell you that I am here to make it all better. The first thing you must do is make friends with Harry Potter. He is the key to everything, Ivory said, stopping in the hall and making Luna look at her to show her how serious she was. You've already started down that path. Stay committed, and don't let anyone stand in your way, no matter who tries. Who would try to stop me? Luna asked, a confused look on her face. Let's just say there are people who want to keep Harry all to themselves, Ivory stated, thinking of his friends. They meant well, but they tended to be on the greedy side when it came to Harry's time and companionship. He is just a boy. How can he be the key to everything? Luna asked, though she knew Ivory spoke the truth. She had seen it. She knew it in her bones. She just didn't want to believe it. She could see it in Ivory's eyes as well. Harry Potter was the future and the reason that this woman was back. And her being friends with him was necessary. I know. I don't like it either, but that's how things are, she said with complete sincerity. She turned and started walking down the hall again. Both the Nargles and the Frangle Snarks insist that he's the key, and you know they never agree on anything. Dee returned as soon as circumstances allowed. Her husband had passed away, and her children were grown. They understood she was traveling back through time to change the world. They accepted that her ascensions might create a new reality or even destroy the one they knew. But since their world was dying anyway, they were willing to take that risk. Why didn't the Harry Potter from the future come back? Little Luna wanted to know. If he was so important he should have come back. He is the boy who lived. He must be more in the future. He couldn't, Ivory replied simply. There was so much turmoil in that poor man's life. So many people meddling and interfering, it was almost impossible to comprehend. All that interference needed to be stopped before it got any worse. She was going to do her best to do that. And it all started with freeing Sirius Black. Or he wouldn't, Luna muttered, reading between the lines. No, he really couldn't. There were circumstances that he could not control, Ivory said, trying to keep the anger out of her tone. Not that she was angry at Luna. She was angry at those circumstances. There had been people in Harry's life that had created them, that had allowed it so that he could not make the jump. That was why she was here and not him. He would have been better. He knew all the players and all the scenarios. She only knew the bare bones and had clairvoyance to help her. It was either her or Hermione, and Hermione was not a good option. She was too stuck on, changing the future was a bad thing. There were times she really didn't like that woman. I can hear the anger in your voice, Luna said, peering at her questioningly. Never you mind. You will learn soon enough that there are people in this world that you just cannot trust, no matter how nice they are to you, Ivory said. Remembering who it was that had betrayed them all. How much it had hurt and the anger they had all felt. It had been devastating. They had all trusted this person with their lives. And it all came crashing down around them. Oh, okay, Luna said, thinking that she thought she already knew that. I know you believe you're already aware of that, but trust me, you aren't, Ivory cautioned. She understood her younger self's innocence, remembering how easily she had placed her faith in the person who would later betray them all. It was understandable. Their betrayer had seemed so kind, and everyone, even the ever-cautious Harry, had trusted them without hesitation. I will keep an open mind, and keep an eye out for Flutterfairies, Luna said, nodding with determination. She realized that if she couldn't rely on herself, trusting others would be even harder. That was the message Ivory was trying to convey, that in the end, the only person she could truly count on was Harry. I'd rather you keep your eyes open for backstabbers, but, yeah, keep your eyes open for those too, Ivory said, running her hand down Luna's hair. She had stopped relying on the microscopic animals ages ago. But little Luna needed those creatures to keep her sane. Were you married? Luna asked, wanting to know what her future was like. That and she wanted to change the subject to something hopefully happy. Yes. But you probably won't marry the same man, Ivory said, looking at her sadly. Oh, why not? The smaller blonde asked, truly puzzled. Because I want you to choose someone else. I care deeply for my husband. But I cannot say I ever truly loved him. My heart always belonged to another. Still, I will let you decide for yourself who that person should be, Ivory said, offering a gentle smile. She had shared a good life with Rolf Scamander, he had been a wonderful husband, but she always sensed something was missing. She loved her children dearly and missed them every day. Most nights, she still found herself in tears, haunted by the thought that they might be lost to her. She hoped, perhaps, they were still alive in her old world trying to save it. All right, I sue. PPOSE I'm a bit too young to be concerned about marriage just yet, but I'll keep it in mind, Luna replied with a warm smile. At the moment, she was far more preoccupied with finding her missing shoes than with thoughts of her future husband. Hopefully, being friends with Harry will put an end to that. As it was, he had his elf friend Dobby on the search for them. That's all I ask, Ivory said, letting go of her hand. She moved along the hallway and towards her quarters. Luna skipping by her side. Sometimes she wished she was small like that again, where she didn't have any more care in the world than where her shoes were. Right now, she had to figure out how to get the rat out of Gryffindor dorms without alerting anyone. Getting into Gryffindor Tower was not a viable option, so Ivory came up with a different solution. A week later she asked the students to bring their familiars with them to the classroom to see if there was a psychic bond with them. If you have a pet, bring them too. We can check to see if they will develop into a familiar bond, she told the class. How do we know if our pet is our familiar? Hermione asked, thinking of her cat Crookshanks. It's a feeling deep within your soul. Professor Moonblossom explained, resting her hand over her heart. You'll know your familiar is one, because it just feels right. The animal feels like a part of you. For some, it's as comforting as a warm bath. For others, it might be like a refreshing breeze, or even the embrace of a loving mother. Each person experiences it differently. That's the best way I can describe it, she finished with a gentle shrug. Oh, said Hermione, nodding her head in understanding. She had felt such a thing the first time she saw her half-Kneazle. It was like cuddling up with a good book and cup of tea on a rainy day. Harry was nodding along with her. Hedwig had given off a similar feeling. To him it was like a warm blanket and a cup of cocoa on a winter's day. He knew she was his familiar when Hagrid had given her to him. Not that he knew what a familiar was, but he knew she was special. Ron, however, couldn't sense the familiar bond with Scabbers. To him, his pet rat just felt like another hand-me-down. Something else that set him apart from his friends. Still, he decided to bring Scabbers along, clinging to a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, a connection would develop after all. 3 days, hence. Bring them here, Professor Moonblossom instructed, making shooing motions as the bell rang. That will give us time to make preparations. Don't forget to do your essays on what a familiar is, how to feel the bond, and turn them in tomorrow. She turned back towards the chalkboard and waved her wand to erase it for the next class. Harry, Ron and Hermione left the room, talking about the familiar bond and how it might pertain to them. I think that Hedwig is my familiar, Harry said, excited about that. He stepped to the side of the hall so they could chat and not get in the way of everyone else. I know Crookshanks is mine, Hermione exclaimed, bouncing in place as the rest of the class passed them by. I don't think Scabbers is, Ron stated, looking gloomy. He really was feeling upset about this. If it makes you feel better, I don't think Trevor is mine either, Neville said, joining them. He didn't feel any better than Ron. Why do you say that, Neville? Hermione asked, looking at the shy boy. She felt bad for both of the boys. I don't feel any of those things the professor talked about, Neville admitted with a shrug. Honestly, I only ended up with Trevor because I survived that fall. It was such a scary moment, I really thought I might die. His eyes grew distant for a moment, lost in the memory. Although bouncing on the ground saved him, the fear hadn't faded. Then Neville forced a small, uncertain smile. Anyway, it's not important. A toad isn't what I want for a familiar, if I'm being honest. I think I'd much prefer a cat. I don't know what I'd do without Hedwig, Harry said, shaking his head. He couldn't imagine his life without watching her fly in the sky. It was some of the most peaceful times he had. Sometimes he got on his broom and flew with her. They had a bond that just couldn't be explained. I know what you mean, Hermione said, thinking of all the times she and Crookshanks just sat reading. It was beyond peaceful and a time to forget all her worries. If she hadn't made a promise, she'd use her time turner to do it more often. Come on, Ron said, feeling left out and jealous, let's go eat. He hoped that Scabbers would form a bond with him so he could have that sensation. The four friends headed to lunch, making sure to shift the conversation to lighter topics so Neville and Ron wouldn't feel left out. Still, Harry found himself distracted, his thoughts drifting back to Hedwig. After finishing his meal, he quietly excused himself and made his way to visit his familiar. Not long after, Luna appeared beside him. Hi, Luna, Harry greeted. Did Dobby manage to find your shoes? He asked as she approached. Oh yes, he was incredibly helpful, Luna replied as she approached and gently stroked Hedwig, who responded by nipping at her fingers. Have they stopped taking your shoes? Harry asked, hoping the bullying had eased up. Well, yes, they've stopped hiding my shoes, Luna admitted, her face part why hidden behind her hair as if she was keeping something to herself. But they haven't stopped bullying you, have they? Harry surmised softly. He knew just his presence wasn't going to cease it completely. He was going to have to do something drastic for that to happen. Was he up to that though? He didn't know yet. It's nothing, Luna said, dismissing it with a small wave of her hand. Most of the bullying had faded into the occasional teasing now. It didn't bother her much anymore, she could handle a bit of harmless ribbing. You let me know if there is anything I can do, he told her, tucking her hair behind her ear. You are my friend. He meant that too. He'd do anything for his friends. Come on, I was going to take Hedwig flying. Do you want to watch? He knew that seeing the owl soar through the sky was a balm on his soul. It made him feel lighter. Perhaps it might help her too. I'd love to. Perhaps, I will see some flutterfairies, though I did say I was going to watch out for those, Luna said. Tapping her chin thoughtfully. She had promised Ivory that she would keep an eye out for them. Why would you want to spot the flutterfairies? Harry asked, genuinely puzzled. Or maybe avoid seeing them. He added, still unsure. Conversations with Luna could be confusing at times. Flutterfairies reveal those who mean to deceive you, Luna explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They'll circle above the head of your enemy. Otherwise, they just drift through the sky. When the sunlight catches them, they're stunning. Their colors are pink and purple, yet almost transparent. If you're lucky enough to spot them, it's truly magical. I see, said Harry, transfixed on what she was telling him. Sometimes he wished he could see the world through her eyes. However, he had yet to see anything she spoke of. Well, come on, the sun is wasting, he said, going down the stairs. They ventured out of the castle to the slightly chilly outdoors, where Harry let Hedwig fly for a good 2 hours. Luna didn't see any flutterfairies, but she did see quite a few nargles around Harry's head and warned him not to let his mind get muddled. She offered to make him some earrings, but he declined. So, she said she'd make him a cork necklace instead. He accepted that. He would wear it too, no matter what Ron would say. Harry, there is going to be a commotion soon, I need you to let it play out. Luna warned him, her eyes going vacant. She started swaying side to side, like a small breeze would blow her over. What kind of commotion? Harry asked, taking her arm to steady her. She looked like she was going to topple over any moment. Luna, are you okay? It's connected to your parents and how they died, Luna intoned, her voice distant and her gaze unfocused. It's about the one who betrayed them. The wrong person has been blamed, but soon the truth will come out. If you try to intervene, though, the real betrayer will escape, she concluded, blinking and giving her head a small shake. What do you mean, Luna? Harry asked her. He wanted to take her and shake the answer out of her. But she was his friend, and he wouldn't do that. I'm sorry, did I say something? She asked, blinking at him again. She looked at him with a blank face and inquisitive eyes. Yes, just now, Harry replied, his frustration evident. He couldn't understand why Luna had said such a thing. You mentioned that something was about to happen, and warned me that if I got involved, my parents' betrayer would escape. What exactly did you mean by that? He pressed, his voice tense. Harry longed to know more about the night his parents died. So much had been kept from him, and the lack of answers troubled him. I don't remember, Luna said in a small voice. She didn't want Harry mad at her. This was why she was bullied. People didn't like it when she spoke in riddles and couldn't tell them more. Her gift was strong, but a pain in the ass at times. Harry inhaled slowly, recalling from seeing the truth that seers often forget the prophecies they revealed. It's all right, Luna, he said with a sigh. He ran a hand through his hair and collected himself. It wasn't her fault. Let's see if Professor Moonblossom might be able to help us. If anyone knew what to do, it was the divinations professor. She seemed to know what she was about. With a quick whistle, he summoned Hedwig, who fluttered down and perched on his arm. After returning Hedwig to the Ollery, Harry and Luna made their way back toward the castle in search of the professor. They found her in the classroom setting up for the next day. Professor, I think Luna gave a prophecy or just predicted the future. I'm not sure of the difference, Harry said, a confused look on his face. There isn't a difference, Ivory said, coming up to them with some concern in her eyes. She went to Luna and stared at her. Are you all right? She asked, thinking Harry might have turned on her in anger. I am fine, Luna said with a bright smile. She tried to express that Harry wouldn't do that. Good, Ivory said, running a hand down the girl's hair. Now, what did she say? She asked, turning to Harry. Harry told her what he could remember and frowned that it wasn't word for word. Something about my parents' death, their betrayer and it being the wrong person. And that I shouldn't interfere. That's all I can remember. I'm sorry I can't remember it all, he said. He hoped that he hadn't forgotten anything important. That's all right. What you've remembered is enough, Ivory reassured him. It's important that you keep her words in mind. If anything happens that's connected to your parents, try not to get involved. Let the adults take care of it. I understand you usually act before thinking, but this time, you need to step back and let others handle the situation. Ivory knew this advice would be difficult for Harry, given his natural tendency to jump into action before considering the consequences. I'll try, Harry said, frowning. He didn't like what was happening. He knew that Sirius Black was at large, but he didn't know the story surrounding him. However, from what these two were telling him, he might have something to do with his parents' death. Yet again, if what Luna said was true, he was the wrong man. It was just too confusing. If Sirius Black was the wrong man, then who was his parents' betrayer? And why would they be at Hogwarts? Then again, he could be jumping to conclusions again and Black might not have anything to do with it at all. They hadn't mentioned him. Don't fret so, Harry Potter, Luna said, her eyes full of pity. It will all work out in the end. Is that another prophecy? Harry asked, giving her a weak smile. No, just a feeling. Thank you, he said, acking her hand and nodding to the professor. We'll be going now. I must get Luna back to her dorm. It'll be time for dinner soon and we must wash up. He led Luna to the door. Bye, Ivory, Luna called out as she was led from the classroom. Goodbye, Luna, Mr. Potter, Ivory said, a frown on her face. She didn't like that Luna was giving prophecies to Harry. Not that she could stop her, but it would make Harry jumpy. She was going to have to be extremely careful when she snatched Scabbers. 3 days later, the divinations classroom buzzed with students and their pets. Harry, Hermione, and Ron sat together, each trying to keep their animals under control at their table. Both Crookshanks and Hedwig seemed intent on getting to Scabbers, forcing Harry to keep Hedwig locked in a cage and Hermione to secure Crookshanks in his carrier. Ron, however, didn't have any sort of container for Scabbers, which was causing concern not only for his friends but for others in the room as well. Ron, you have to find something to put your rat in, Harry said, seeing that more than one cat was eyeballing the rat. Why? Ron asked, petting his frightened rat and trying to calm him down. Scabbers squirmed and wiggled in his grip, trying to get away. He held him fast and worried that he would get hurt if he got loose. Because he is going to be eaten if you don't get him safe soon, Hermione said, sniffing at him. I have to keep Crookshanks in this carrier. I don't see why you think you can let your pet run free. Well, he's only a little guy, Ron said, like that made a difference. I've got Trevor in a container, Neville said, lifting a glass jar with a metal lid that had holes punched in the top. Yes, Mr. Weasley, you really need to put your rat in some kind of container, Professor M. Moonblossom said as she approached the group. With a wave of her wand, she conjured a cage and placed it on the table in front of them. He's too vulnerable to defend himself if any of the other animals were to get loose, she explained, gesturing toward the cage. Fine, Ron said, putting Scabbers in the cage and then gasping in shock when the door sealed shut. Hey, he exclaimed. Do not worry, it is just to keep him safe. Ivory assured Ron, gently patting his shoulder before turning her attention to the class. I will begin at the front and work my way to the back, casting spells on each of your pets to check their health and ensure they are well. After that, I will cast another spell to look for a psychic bond. If your pet is a familiar, the bond will glow gold. If it has the potential to become a familiar, it will glow silver. If it's simply a pet, the glow will be white. With a calm nod, she stepped to the first table and began the process by casting the initial spell. The first pet showed that it was in fine health. So she cast the second spell and it flashed silver. She smiled at the student and moved on to the next animal. On and on it went until she came to Scabbers. And she cast the first spell. It showed that the rat was not in good condition. Hey, what's wrong with my rat? Ron said, grabbing the cage and trying to get to his pet. But the door stayed shut and Ron was not happy. I am not sure what is wrong. I am not a magizoologist, Professor Moonblossom replied. But we can bring him to Professor Hagrid and see if he can help. With a gentle wave of her wand, she cast a spell to put the rat to sleep. Hey, what did you do that for? Ron yelled, clutching the cage to his chest. I do not want the animal to suffer, she said in a gentle, far-off voice. Professor Moonblossom then turned her attention to Harry, casting the health check spell, which revealed that Hedwig was in excellent condition. When she performed the familiar bond spell, a bright golden glow shone around Hedwig, confirming her strong magical connection with Harry. Hermione's turn came next, and Crookshanks also received a clean bill of health, with the familiar bond glowing gold as well. Hermione smiled proudly at Harry, and they exchanged a knowing nod, pleased that both of their animals had been confirmed as familiars. Moving to Neville, Professor Moonblossom examined Trevor, whose results showed he was a perfectly healthy toad, though without the magical bond, he was just a regular pet. After completing health and bond checks for the rest of the class, Ivory addressed everyone. Thank you for bringing your animals today. Please remember to read the next chapter in your textbooks and prepare a 2-foot essay on clairvoyance, explaining why having the sight is essential to practicing it. The class moaned and got up with their animals and started leaving the room. Mr. Weasley, would you and your friends please come with me? Let us take your rat to Professor Hager. And see if he can figure out what is wrong, Professor Moonblossom said. She then posted a notice that her next class was cancelled and instructed her students to head to the library. All right, Ron said, picking up the cage and following the teacher out of the classroom. Harry and Hermione were hot on his heels with their familiars. They hustled along and were soon at Hagrid's hut, where the giant of a man was setting up for his next class. Professor Hagrid, there is something wrong with Mr. Weasley's rat, Ivory said, indicating the cage in Ron's hands. All right, let me have a look, Hagrid said, setting aside the log he'd been preparing for his class. He extended his enormous hand toward Ron. Hesitant but hopeful, Ron handed over the cage. Hagrid peered closely at the rat, his brow furrowing as he examined the small creature. Doesn't seem anything's the matter at first glance, he admitted. I'll keep air for a few days and keep an eye on maybe someone else take a look, just in case. I'll let you know what I find out in a couple of days, he assured Ron. You'll take care of him? Ron asked, anxiously. He might not love the animal, but he was all he had. Yeah, he'll be right as rain in no time, Hagrid said, putting the cage in one of his large coat pockets. He turned back to his task, effectively dismissing them. Well, let us get back to the castle. I will explain your tardiness. Ivory told the 3 students as she walked towards the school. She escorted them to Transfigurations and told McGonagall why they were late. The stern professor was not happy, but didn't want to make waves. So she just waved the 3 in. Harry and his friends quietly took their seats, keeping Hedwig and Crookshanks in their carriers alongside the other pets still lingering from divination class. Since no one had a chance to return their animals beforehand, the classroom buzzed with the sounds of restless creatures. Professor McGonagall, clearly displeased, pressed her lips together and tolerated the disruption, but made her expectations clear. Next time, make sure you take an extra minute to put them away before class, she instructed firmly. HP. When classes ended, Ivory made her way to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom and approached Remus Lupin. Using her ethereal tone, she said, "Professor Lupin, I believe your presence is required at the Care of Magical Creatures hut." "Oh, what makes you say that?" Remus asked, giving her a puzzled look. He was still unsure how to interpret this enigmatic teacher. She had confronted him directly the first time they met, calling him both a coward and a disloyal yet a loyal friend. The contradiction had left him completely bewildered, and ever since, he'd done his best to keep his distance from her. "There is a creature there that needs your attention," she stated, still looking like she was staring past the wall. "What kind of creature?" Remus asked, getting confused. He hated talking to seers, they always talked in riddles. "One that is not what it seems to be," Ivory said, then she turned and walked away. "Are you coming?" she asked, looking over her shoulder. "I suppose I am," he said, getting up from the desk and following her. They made their way to the hut and Remus knocked on the door. When Hagrid answered, he said, "Hello, Hagrid, Ivory here tells me there's a creature that needs my attention." "Well, I don't rightly know which creature she's talkin' about, but I would like you to take a look at this rat," Hagrid said, waving them in. "All right," Remus said, smiling at the gentle giant. He moved into the hut, Ivory at his side. They came up to the table and Remus started growling at the sight of Wormtail. He smelled him as soon as he saw him. "Wormtail," he snarled, pulling his wand. "How are you alive?" he asked, not expecting an answer. "Professor?" Hagrid asked, backing away from the angry werewolf. "This is not a rat," Remus said, still holding his wand at the rodent. "Hagrid, go and get Dumbledore. If you wouldn't mind, could you also bring Professor Sprout?" Ivory requested, wanting someone besides just the headmaster present. She placed her trust in the head of Hufflepuff to act fairly. And in fact, Sprout was the only head of house at Hogwarts whom Ivory truly trusted. "All right," Hagrid replied, giving her a puzzled look. No one had ever asked him to do that before, but he agreed anyway. He was always a bit wary of the divinations professor, she was quite spooky. He took off to get the 2 people that were requested of him. "Why did you ask for Sprout?" Remus asked, keeping his wand on Wormtail. Not that he thought the rat could do anything from the cage. Still, he wasn't going to take the chance that Peter wouldn't transform into his human form. He shot a stunning spell at the rat and knocked him out, just in case. "She will keep the headmaster honest," Ivory stated, swaying a little bit. "Dumbledore is always honest," Remus protested, glaring at her like she was wrong. She shot him a look like he was being simple and said, "You know better than that, Remus Lupin." "I owe him my education," Remus murmured, lowering his head. Without Albus, he wouldn't have had any of the opportunities Hogwarts gave him. He wouldn't have found friends who changed his life or experienced the world as he had. Everything he'd become, he owed to that chance. "That does not make him infallible," she replied, her chin lifted defiantly. "I know what you are, and I understand why he made his choices, even if you do not. You are a good man, Remus, but you do not owe him your life." She shook her head, troubled by how broken he seemed. They remained silent until first Sprout, then Dumbledore and Hagrid came. Pomona looked confused as to why she was there, and asked, "Why are we here?" "This rat is actually a man," Ivory said, pointing to the rat in the cage. "He belonged to Ron Weasley. He has been living with that family for over 12 years. She wanted to emphasize that fact. "It's Peter Pettigrew," Remus added, looking at Dumbledore like he was the salvation to the problem. He wanted to kill the rat, but if Peter was alive that meant that Sirius was innocent. There had to be a solution to this problem. You may go, Pomona. We can handle it from here, Albus said, waving her away. He couldn't let this get out. Black had to stay on the run for a while longer. He needed him out of the way for now. Remus could be reasoned with, as could Black. He wasn't sure about Moonblossom, but Pomona was a stand-up person and would do the right thing. I want her here, Ivory stated. Standing firm, she knew if Sprout left now, everything would unravel, and it would all be for naught. You may go as well, Dumbledore said, looking down his nose at her. No, I do not think so, she said, folding her arms over her chest. I want to see this through. I brought the rat here and I want to be able to look Mr. Weasley in the eye to tell him what happened to his pet. She wasn't going to go anywhere. She was going to see that Sirius Black was freed, and Harry was raised by him from now on. I am your boss, Albus tried to pull rank. This is not a school matter, she replied, her nose in the air. This caused Remus and Pomona to start. They had never heard anyone talk to Albus that way. I think we should call the Aurors, Sprout said, going to the fireplace to make that call. I'm not connected to the flow, Hagrid informed her. It was something that actually irked him, but his hut wasn't allowed to be connected because it was not part of the castle. Then we should take this to the castle and call from there. This is a Department of Magical Law Enforcement matter, Pomona insisted. She picked up the cage and headed out of the hut. I'm sure that Madame Bones will want to know that she's hunting an innocent man. She was shocked that Black was indeed innocent. She had been so sure he was guilty. However, the proof was in her hands. Pomona, I must insist that you allow me to take over from here, Dumbledore said, striding after her onto the grounds. Ivory and Remus followed behind, one burdened with confused guilt, the other radiating righteous pride. I'm sorry, Albus, but Ivory is right, this isn't a school issue. I'm taking this straight to the DMLE, Sprout declared, resolutely heading toward the castle. She stayed alert, wary of any attempt by him to intervene. There was nothing he could do but follow along, all the while plotting on how he could stop this. Sprout, Moonblossom, Lupin and Dumbledore were walking to the castle while Albus was trying, and failing, to turn this to his advantage. Ivory was doing her best to keep an eye on the old man to make sure that he wasn't going to turn this around and ruin it for Harry. Remus was falling back, contemplating what Ivory had said, but not so much that his mind would have changed. Pomona was just determined to get to a flow to turn over the strange rat man. As they trudged up to the castle, they came across Harry, Ron and Hermione, who were on their way to the Quidditch pitch to watch Harry practice. Ron saw his rat in Sprout's hands and did what any other hothead would do. Hey, what are you doing with Scabbers? He's sick. He should be at Hagrid's hut, not out in the cold air, the redhead demanded, coming up to the herbologists trying to snatch the cage out of her hands. Sprout held on tight and said, Mr. Weasley, you don't know what you are talking about. Remove yourself from this area immediately. She tried to go around the trio, but Ron was a pushy teenager. The rat started to stir and was moving around the cage trying to get out. It squealed, thrashed and banged its body against the cage. It was determined to get out and was frantically doing its best to do so. What are you talking about? That's my pet rat, Ron said, stepping in her way again. Look at him, you're scaring him. He made to grab for the cage again. Step aside, you foolish boy, Pomona tried again, this time hiding the cage behind her back. It was starting to rock. The rat was getting panicky on its attempts to escape. She almost dropped it, the cage was jostling so badly. Dumbledore tried to use the distraction to open the cage with his wand, but it was shut fast. Ivory had sealed it so that only she could unlatch it. Ivory, seeing what he was doing, came up to Pomona and took the cage. She shielded it from further tampering. She cast a stunning spell on the rat with a bit of wandless magic, and it slumped down immediately. Remember what Luna said, Mr. Potter, she told Harry. Ron, we need to go, Harry urged, grasping his friend's robes and pulling him away, his eyes wide with concern. He was just about to demand an explanation from the adults, but then remembered the warning his small friend had given him, not to interfere and risk letting his parents' betrayer escape. Although Harry couldn't spot anyone who fit that description, he trusted her advice and decided to step back. Harry, what are you talking about? They have my rat, Ron said, fighting his friend's hold. He was very concerned about his pet. Why did they stun it again? We need to let them handle this. It's not what it seems. I am sure that they are taking Scabbers to the vet, he improvised. He didn't know if there were veterinarians in the magical world, but there had to be the equivalent here. What's a vet? Ron asked, looking at Harry, but calming down. A pet doctor, Hermione answered. She didn't know what was going on, but she wasn't going to argue with adults. She had no idea why Ron was. Oh, well, why didn't they say so? Ron said, standing aside. Can I come too? He asked Sprout. No, she replied firmly, her lips pressed into a thin line. You were misbehaving just moments ago. So I don't think you've earned a reward right now. She then turned on her heels and moved on, Ivory right behind her. Remus looked at Harry with a queer look, then he too followed the two women. Dumbledore twinkled at the two boys, then went with the other adults. He needed to get this under his control. Ivory turned her head just as they were about to enter the castle and winked at Harry. She knew that it had been hard for him to step aside. She carried the rat with her and followed Sprout to the nearest flow, which was in one of the rooms they used for guest visitors. They gathered inside the room, Ivory still clutching the cage tightly. Without hesitation, Sprout approached the flow, tossed powder into the flames, and leaned in to call the DMLE. I need to speak with Madam Bones. There's a criminal here at Hogwarts. It concerns the Black case. That clearly got a response, as Bones appeared moments later. This is Amelia Bones. What can I do for you? Came the voice from the fire. Her face soon materialized in the flames. A stern woman who looked both harried and weary, as if this was the last thing she wanted to deal with, yet she accepted that it was necessary. I have a rat here that is a man. And I am told that he may be Peter Pettigrew, Pomona said, still kneeled into the fire. The hell you say, Amelia said, shocked beyond belief. Those were words that she was not expecting to hear. She had been hoping that they had caught Sirius Black, not that they had found a dead man. That is what I am told, Sprout said, huffing. Come through and take a look for yourself. Step aside, Bones said, pulling her head out. Sprout got up and stepped aside and waited. She brushed off her skirts and stood by the table near Ivory. She looked at Dumbledore as if daring him to interfere. He just stood there contemplating. Remus was staring at the rat, with both guilt and anger. He looked like he wanted to wake the rat up and question it. Years of knowledge that wasn't true were beating on his mind. He wanted answers and he wanted them now. The only person who had those answers was stunned in a cage in rat form. Bones came through a few moments later, station giving her the authority to do that. She looked around the room and soon saw the rat in the cage. That would be him then? She asked, pulling out her wand. She cast the spell to see if what they told her was true. It was indeed an animagus. Let him out, she demanded, keeping him at wand point. Ivory put the cage on the table and released the door on the cage. She jiggled the cage and the stunned rat slid to the table. She too pulled her wand and pointed it at the rat. Amelia cast the spell and reverted the rat to a human. There sleeping on the table was Peter Pettigrew. Well, fuck, Bones said, binding the man. This throws the Kneazle among the snitches. She rubbed her forehead and thought about what she was to do now. She knew she had to take this man in, but she would have to exonerate Sirius Black too. That was going to cause so much trouble politically. Everyone was going to be up in arms. Does this mean that Black is innocent? Remus asked, guilt heavy in his tone and on his face. Of this at least. Bones agreed, tapping her wand against her leg. She kept her eyes on the stunned man on the table in case he woke. Yes, there's still the matter of the Muggle murders and the escape from Azkaban. Dumbledore said, clinging to any argument that would keep Sirius on the run. He considered the possibility of reviving Peter and letting him get away, but there were too many witnesses present. And Bones wouldn't hesitate to stop him. At the very least, he would end up in a holding cell. Dumbledore knew he couldn't risk it. If he was wrongly imprisoned, then Nickley he didn't escape anything at all, Ivory said thoughtfully, tapping her chin. And if this man only pretended to die, it's reasonable to suspect he might have been the one who killed the Muggles. An innocent man would not hide for 12 years, Amelia agreed, still tapping her wand on her leg. She was glaring at Peter, like he had just complicated her life, which he had. Fudge was going to be a nightmare. And she still had to find Black and keep this one alive enough to stand trial. Not to mention, his animagus form. He was going to be tricky to keep imprisoned. I would keep him stunned until the day of his trial. Ivory suggested, though she knew that wasn't viable. If not, then perhaps magical inhibitor cuffs. She posed it as a question because she knew that they were express. Ensive and that the DMLE might not have any. We do have a few, but I'll need to formally request a pair, Bones replied. She fired a stunning spell at Pettigrew, then transformed him back into his rat form. Swiftly, she pushed him into the cage and locked the door securely. With a flick of her wand, she reinforced the cage, ensuring it was impervious to any attempts at escape. Good, Ivory remarked, maintaining her composed exterior. She no longer embodied the carefree spirit of her youth, at least, she was determined to appear that way. As she glanced around the room, it was clear that everyone was pleased with the turn of events. Remus showed a mix of guilt and happiness, while Sprout seemed both relieved and somewhat overwhelmed. Dumbledore, however, was carefully concealing his disappointment. Well, I had better get this man back to the department, Bones said, grabbing the cage. I don't have to tell you to keep this to yourselves, she warned the people in the room. She went to the flow and was through the fire in a short time, leaving behind the stunned group. I, for one, am glad that is over. Now, I must go and fortify myself with a good cup of tea, Sprout said, turning and leaving the room. Everyone was sure that tea would have a bit of something extra in it. I will see myself to my rooms, Ivory announced, leaving Remus and Dumbledore to their private conversation. As she walked briskly toward her quarters, her mind raced with plans for her next move. She needed to locate Sirius Black before the headmaster could intervene. If what future Harry had revealed was accurate, Sirius was vulnerable to manipulation. Ivory was determined to ensure Sirius would look after young Harry and not allow Dumbledore to persuade him to leave the boy with the Dursleys. HP. Harry, why did you stop me from getting my rat? Ron asked, when the adults had left. Now that they were gone, he was upset that he hadn't fought harder to get his pet. Luna told me that here would be a commotion and that I needed to stay out of it or my parents' betrayer would escape, Harry said, rubbing the side of his nose. He was still confused over what happened, since he didn't see anyone that could have been the betrayer, but he trusted Luna and Professor Moonblossom. What does that have to do with my rat? Ron asked, upset that none of this made any sense. I don't know, but I took her at her word and didn't interfere, Harry said, standing tall. He didn't regret his actions. He would do it again, even if Ron got upset. Honestly, Ronald, you shouldn't argue with the teachers like that. I am sure they were doing what is best for Scabbers, Hermione said, standing with her hands on her hips and her lips pursed. What do you know? They might have been hurting him, Ron said, not really believing that, but wanting to stand up for himself and his behavior. Didn't you see the way he was fighting to get out of his cage? You don't believe that for a moment. You just acted rashly and didn't think, Hermione stated, getting heated. Knock it off, you two. Let's just go eat. I'm sure we'll hear about what is going on soon enough, Harry said, going into the cast. Lit to the great hall where dinner would be soon served. He trusted Ron and Hermione to follow along. They would still bicker, but they would come. Luna came up to them and said, you did well. Now Sirius Black will be free and so will you. She stared off into space but cozied up into his side. What do you mean by that? Harry asked, slipping his arm around Luna's shoulders and pulling her closer. He gave her a gentle squeeze, feeling a fondness for her that was warm and protective, like the little sister he'd always wished for. There are things in the works that will set you free, was all she would say on that. Her eyes focused on his face, and she beamed a smile at him. The room lit up with that smile and made him feel good. Okay, Harry said slowly as he guided her to the Gryffindor table. She had been eating there for a few days now. Don't worry, Harry, everything is going to be okay from now on. If you pay attention to what is going on around you, that is. The fates love you, Luna predicted, grabbing the first thing to eat that popped up on the table, which was roasted chicken. She started eating it like a woman starved. Maybe, she hadn't eaten much at breakfast. I'll take you at your word, Harry said as he watched the still arguing Ron and Hermione take a seat across from him. He really hoped what she said was true. He didn't want to fight anymore. If there was a light at the end of the tunnel, he was running for it. Ivory was humming to herself as she waved her wand and set up her classroom with incense and candles. They were going to do meditation and clairvoyance tomorrow. So she needed a calming space. The desks were all shoved to the side and there were going to be spaces where the students could sit and reflect. Hopefully they would understand that none of them had the sight. At least as far as she knew, and they could move on to tarot. She was just putting down mats, when Luna drifted into the room. "You are needed in the headmaster's office, T. He waif of a girl said in that dreamy voice of hers. Am I now? Ivory replied, slipping her wand into her sleeve and smoothing out her skirt. With calm purpose, she walked toward the back wall where her shawls were draped. She had anticipated this moment, having already seen it, though she hadn't known precisely when it would occur. Prepared for a battle of wits, Ivory readied herself. She was confident she could win Sirius's trust easily. He tended to be charmed by a pretty face, but her real challenge was outmaneuvering the headmaster. "Yes, I saw a large black dog go in there not moments ago. I would grab Professor Lupin. If I were you," Luna said as she started to leave the room. She was no longer needed here. She was going to go and find Harry and let him know that his godfather was going to get help and would write to him soon. "Thank you, Luna," Ivory said, putting an off-white shawl on. She hurried to the Dada classroom and looked for Remus. He was reading a book at the desk. "We are needed at the headmaster's office," she said, coming up to him with some urgency. She wanted to be there as soon as possible. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to talk Sirius into listening to her. "For what reason?" Remus inquired, setting his book aside. He understood that Ivory often perceived things others missed, and after the incident with Peter, he was inclined to trust her instincts. Her comments about Dumbledore had given him pause, and while he wasn't sure the headmaster was truly malicious, he was now more receptive to the idea that some manipulation might be at play. "Black is there," Ivory said, twirling around and leaving the room all but floating down the hallway in great haste. She really needed to be there before the headmaster did his thing and messed everything up. She tapped the gargoyles on the head and whispered the password, which she knew from her own intuition. Remus was right behind her. She flowed up the stairs and entered the room without announcing herself. In the room, there were Albus Dumbledore, Sirius Black and Severus Snape. That last one was a mistake on the headmaster's part. There was an argument going on between the two younger men. It looked like it had been going on for quite a while and going nowhere fast. "Do you know?" Black demanded, his voice tense and eyes wild, the desperation of a fugitive etched across his face. His prison uniform hung loosely from his emaciated frame, emphasizing how thin he'd become. At least he was clean now, but his gaunt cheeks and the uneven haircut, clearly done with a knife and straightened only by his own fingers, gave him a haunted appearance. "I know you're a murderer," Severus declared, his voice cold and unwavering. He fixed the fugitive with a look of pure loathing, his pale face tight with anger and a trace of fear. Years of animosity seemed etched into every line of his expression. Now, gentlemen, we must strive to do the right thing," Albus said, holding out his hands, trying to stop the fight. He should have known that bringing Severus here was a miscalculation on his part. He had forgotten that Sirius had tried to get the man to visit the werewolf in his den on the full moon. "I didn't tell you to visit Moony that night. You were stupid enough to do that all on your own," Sirius snapped, leaning on wall like he was guiltless of all crime. It looked out of place given his attire. "Why you?" Severus started, lifting his wand, and starting forward. "Hello," Ivory said, announcing herself and Remus. Every head in the room turned their way and Sir Ias's eyes widened and he bounded over to Remus and hugged him. "Did I come at a bad time?" she asked as she glided into the room. Severus dropped his wand and took a step back and glared at her. "Moony, can you believe it? They've found Peter," Sirius exclaimed, grabbing Remus and spinning him joyfully around the room. Despite his slender build, his excitement made him surprisingly strong. "I know. I was there," Remus said, stopping Sirius from twirling him around. "How did you find out?" he asked, looking at him questioningly. The last he had heard, the man was on the run and no one could find him. "Albus sent me an owl telling me the whole story. He told me he had some things to tell me and that I had to come as soon as possible," Sirius said, his smile was huge. He pulled the letter from his pocket and showed it to his best friend. It was dirty and crumbled, and there were some food stains on it. It looked like it had been read multiple times. Remus took it and read it quickly. It was what it said. A letter that explained that Peter had been found and that Sirius was a free man. That he was to come to Albus's office to talk about what to do next. I see, he said, handing the letter to Ivory. Ivory glanced over the letter before returning it to Sirius. Why didn't you contact the DMLE? Only they and the minister have the authority to officially declare you free, she remarked. Settling into the chair across from the desk, she gestured for both men to join her, aiming to help them feel at ease. Severus took his spot on the wall behind Albus. He was leery of the woman. She had predicted that he would die a horrible death by the Dark Lord. She had told him that his master would return and that it would be worse than it was before and that he would die in that war. She had not sugar-coated it in any way. She warned him that he needed to change his ways, or he would die a bitter lonely man that everyone hated and thought to be the enemy. Who are you? Sirius asked, curiosity mingling with admiration in his gaze. He noticed her slender frame, striking large eyes, and long flowing blonde hair. She was undeniably captivating, especially after his long absence from the outside world. And why haven't we met before? He added, assuming they must have attended school together since they looked about the same age. With a charming smile, he gently took her hand and pressed a kiss to it before settling into the seat beside her. Remus rolled his eyes and sat down beside Sirius, clearly unimpressed by his friend's antics. He thought about warning Sirius of Ivory's gift, but decided to let him find out for himself. I am Ivory Moonblossom, and you did not answer my question, Ivory said, not bothering with his flirting. She would deal with that later. She knew old easily fall for a handsome man like Black. He was easy on the eyes and a romantic at heart. She couldn't have the man she loved, he was but a child now, but she could be comfortable with Sirius. If she let herself. Dumbledore told me to come here, so I came, Sirius said with a shrug. He didn't see anything wrong with that. Besides, it was the DMLE that threw him in prison without a trial, wasn't it? I see, Ivory said, shaking her head with a look of displeasure. That seemed to hurt Sirius more than it should have. This lovely lady's disappointment was something that he didn't want to have. What should I have done? He asked, only to be interrupted by Albus. Now, Professor Moonblossom, what are you doing in my office? The old man asked, peering over his half-moon spectacles. I am in the middle of a private conversation, as you can well see. I am here to make sure that Mr. Black does not make the biggest mistake of his life. Well, the second biggest, she corrected, looking at Sirius like he had better listen to what she had to say. Your first mistake was going after Pettigrew, she reminded him. Don't remind me, Sirius grumbled, looking guilty. I do not see what business it is of yours what Sirius does with his life, Albus stated, folding his hands on his desk and looking at her in a grandfatherly fashion. I am more concerned about Harry Potter, and how all of this will affect him, she confessed. This will affect him more than it will anyone else in this room. What about Harry? Sirius asked, sitting up straight and looking at Ivory. What do you mean by that? She seemed to know what she was talking about, even if it didn't make all that much sense to him now. The headmaster is about to try convincing you to stay away from Harry, Ivory stated, raising her chin defiantly as if daring Albus to disagree. He will tell you Harry is safe where he is and that he will be just fine without you. But none of that is true. She looked at him dead in the face to show that she was serious. Harry will be safest if he stays with his relatives, Albus insisted, his mouth tightening. There's nowhere else he could be more secure. He was visibly concerned that Sirius might actually heed Ivory's advice, knowing Sirius could be easily influenced by a beautiful woman. You will start a war if you leave him there. If he goes with Sirius, then a war will be prevented, Ivory predicted. She was prevaricating just a bit. She was the one who was going to stop the war, but it did all hinge on Harry going with Sirius. That does not make any sense, Dumbledore replied, scrutinizing her as if checking for signs of prophecy. Seeing that she wasn't in any sort of trance, he dismissed her words as nothing more than a prediction. Sirius, do you love Harry? Ivory asked, looking at the ex-prisoner. Her eyes were wide and pleading. Yes, with all my heart, Sirius said, his tone was earnest. He had already messed up once, he didn't want to do it again. Do you truly want to do what is best for him? She asked in a steady, gentle tone. Her intention was to guide him toward the right choice without confrontation, knowing that anger would only provoke resistance. "Of course I do," he said. Not sure why she was asking that. He would do anything for his godson. "Then you must do as I say, take custody of Harry and let him live with you. But first, you need to report to the DMLE and then go to St. Mungo's to recover. By the time the school term ends, you will be ready to welcome him into your care," Ivory said, her tone unwavering and authoritative. "I was going to do that anyway," Sirius replied sincerely. Now, more than ever, he was resolved not to let anyone sway him. He was committed to making the right choice for Harry. If Ivory believed this was best, he trusted her judgment. Remus clearly had faith in her, as he hadn't objected to anything she suggested. "Yes, well, if you listen to the headmaster you will not be doing anything of the kind." She looked at the old man with a bit of triumph on her face. "You do know he could have gotten you out of prison at any time, right?" she added, throwing some fuel on the fire. Sirius paused, a troubling thought surfacing. Could Ivory be telling the truth? Had Albus truly possessed the power to release him all along? He turned to the older wizard and asked, "Is Ivory right? Was it within your power to have freed me?" Albus's frustration was evident. He had meticulously arranged everything, only for this slight woman to come in and upend his plans. "Sirius, you barely know her. How can you possibly trust her words over mine? I have been your friend for years," he said. His eyes had that familiar look of disappointment reserved for students who broke the rules. "Don't look at me like that, Albus. I'm not one of your students," Sirius said, unimpressed by the old man's behavior. "Ivory is right. I believe you could have gotten me out. I'll let it go for now, but I won't forget. Still, Harry comes before me, for now. Don't think I'm going to let this go though." With that, he stood, transformed into a dog, barked, and waited at the door to be let out. Remus rose to his feet, still looking a bit bewildered, and followed Sirius out of the room. There was much on his mind. Questions he needed to ask and decisions to make alongside his friend. Determined to support Sirius, Remus planned to accompany him to the DMLE and ensure he reached Amelia Bones safely. With his next class not scheduled until tomorrow, he knew he had several hours to help Sirius get settled and begin the necessary process. "Do you realize what you have just done?" Albus asked Ivory, his tone edged with frustration. "There are things happening here that you are not aware of," he added, giving her a look as if she were a mischievous puppy who had piddled on the carpet. "I am fully aware of my actions, Albus. In fact, I know far more than you think. By now, you ought to realize that," Ivory replied, her voice calm but resolute. "I will do everything in my power to stop a war from breaking out." Rising from her seat, she turned toward the door. "I do not understand your reasons for seeking conflict, but whatever they are, I will do my best to prevent it," she said before leaving the room. Just as Ivory closed the door behind her, Snape's voice cut through the silence. "Is it true, Headmaster? Do you actually want a war?" Harry sat on one of the benches beneath a window in the hallway outside the Gryffindor dormitory. He needed a break from listening to his two best friends argue, once again, about Scabbers. This had been going on ever since they had encountered the adults outside the castle, and neither Ron nor Hermione seemed willing to let it drop. Harry was growing weary of their constant bickering. He could see where both of them were coming from, but he had been warned and had followed the instructions he was given. Now, he couldn't help but worry about what had happened now that it was over. Luna came skipping up to him and said, "Your godfather is getting the help he needs and will be writing to you soon." She cuddled up to him and sighed. She really loved just sitting with Harry. He made the Nargles quiet down for a while. It was as if his presence was a balm to her soul. "Luna, I don't have a godfather," Harry said, looking at her queerly. He would know if he had one, wouldn't he? Then again, he had no clue who his grandparents were, so then again probably not. "Yes, you do," she said, nodding her head in his shoulder. "He's just been detained. He will be waiting for you when school ends. He just needs to heal right now." She looked up into his eyes and showed that she was telling the truth. "Where has he been all this time?" Harry asked, his voice tinged with frustration. The thought that someone could have rescued him from the Dursleys, someone he'd wished for so desperately, night after night, made Harry's heart ache. Now, knowing there was someone who might have been able to help him all along, he couldn't help but feel upset. Prison, Luna said, not blunting it from him. She knew she could talk in riddles and draw it out, but this was not the time for that. Luna, are you saying that my godfather is Sirius Black? Harry asked in dawning realization. Who else could it be? He had been in the news for ages now. Well, yes, Luna said, like it was no big thing. He is innocent. Remember Ron's rat? It was really a man. That man was your parents' betrayer. She sat up and looked at him dead in the face, showing that she was being serious. Luna, how do you know that? Harry asked, his eyes wide with wonder. She always seemed to know what was going on when no one else did. After all, she was the one to warn him about not interfering with the rat and its escape attempt. Now, he knew why. The Nargles told me, she replied, her gaze distant and unfocused. They're always whispering to me about what's going on. She glanced around, as if searching for something only she could sense, then gave her head a little shake, returning to the present. Offering him a small, apologetic smile, she seemed almost as uneasy about it as he was. I see, he replied. Though he didn't truly understand. Drawing her close again, they settled together in the warm afternoon sunlight. For a long while, they simply sat in companionable silence. Rai quietly imagining a future free from the Dursleys, while Luna listened to the whispers of the Nargles. HP. The next day after classes, Remus sought Ivory out. I just wanted to let you know that everything went smoothly with Sirius. He told her as he came into her classroom. He turned himself in and will be seeking healing soon. I know, she said in that airy way of hers. She was flitting around the classroom cleaning up after a day of teaching meditation. I thought you might already know, but I wanted to give you the update myself. It'll probably be all over the morning papers soon. By that time, Sirius should be at St. Mungo's. He needed to be questioned first. Fudge completely lost it when he heard the news. He caused quite a commotion in the department. It was chaos for a while, he said. Settling onto one of the desks. He glanced around, taking in the mats spread across the floor and the lingering scent of incense. This was exactly how he imagined a divination classroom would look. I am sure we will see more of Mr. Black before the year is out, Ivory predicted. She had already seen it. Sirius would be coming to the castle quite often. How so? He will be in the hospital, Remus wanted to know. He didn't understand, Sirius was going to need a lot of healing. He was quite sick. The headmaster is going to cause trouble and only Sirius will be able to quell it, she said, staring off into space. Dumbledore was going to harass Harry and Sirius was going to come from his sick bed to stop it. She then shook her head and went back to using her wand to clean up the classroom. The mats rolled themselves up and stacked neatly along the wall and the desks went back to their assigned places, including the one Remus was sitting on. I do wish I knew why you disliked the man so much, Remus commented. Shaking his head sadly. He knew there were things about the old man that he was questioning but he didn't hate the headmaster. There was too much history between them. He is a manipulative warmonger. Ivory said, with a shrug of her shoulder. What's there not to hate? She asked, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Who wouldn't hate someone who wanted war? You have no proof of that. The werewolf said with little conviction. He had seen it for himself, yesterday and in the last war. Dumbledore would do things that would keep the war going. Little things. Things that would stop the war, would not be done, and things that would continue the war, would be. He didn't notice it then but looking back on it now, yeah, he saw it. You already know that in your heart, she said. Giving him a knowing look. It was as if she was reading his thoughts. I owe him everything, he said, hanging his head. Even now, knowing what he knew, he couldn't hate the man. Yes, including years of poverty, she agreed. What do you mean? Remus asked, not understanding how the old man had anything to do with his unemployment. Well, he voted to keep your kind downtrodden. If it were not for him, and those like him, you could work in the wizarding world and be gainfully employed, she stated, swishing her wand and clearing the chalkboard. That is not true, Remus denied. I am telling you it is, Ivory stated, nodding her head. It is a matter of public record. All you need do is go and look. Remus vowed that he would at first opportunity. Albus had been telling him for years that he had tried to stop those laws, and he had been taking him at his word. Now this wisp of a woman is telling him it was all a lie. She had been telling him the truth thus far, could she be right now? He wasn't sure he could take much more of her truths. Sirius has taken a shine to you, he said, to change the subject. Has he now? She said, a blush on her cheeks. He just couldn't stop talking about you, Remus said with a laugh. Sirius was relentless, always bringing up your name whenever he could. While we were at the DMLE, he peppered Bones with questions about you, where you came from, whether you were married, how old you were, and when you had started working here. He was endlessly curious, asking about every detail. He chuckled at how persistent his friend had been in his interrogation. Well, he has been in prison for a long time. I am sure once he gets out some more, he will find someone a bit more suitable, she said, waving it off. Though, she wasn't quite as sure as she let on. She had already seen it. Oh, I wouldn't be so sure. When Sirius falls for someone, he's completely devoted. He's like a dog with a bone, Remus replied reassuringly. He'd witnessed it before. Back in their school days, Sirius would pursue a girl relentlessly until she agreed to date him. Their relationships lasted until either the feelings faded, or the girl ended things, leaving Sirius heartbroken. I am not sure I like that analogy, she said, wrinkling her nose. Well, he is a dog animagus, Remus said, laughing aloud. She laughed along with him before turning her attention back to tidying up her classroom. As she worked, her mind wandered to the possibility of Sirius Black truly pursuing her. The thought intrigued her, she could envision herself happy with him. Their lives intertwined. If he did decide to chase her, she believed she could be satisfied in a relationship by his side. Once she helped him heal from the scars of Azkaban, again they could share a joyful future and perhaps even raise a large, loving family together. I have to go, Remus said, feeling a touch of envy toward Sirius for catching Ivory's attention. Sirius always seemed to be the fortunate one when it came to romance, while Remus considered himself unlucky in matters of love. He hadn't had a girlfriend in the wizarding world for years. Though he'd had a few brief affairs in the Muggle world, none had blossomed into lasting relationships. He didn't dare with his infliction. Do not fret so, Mr. Lupin, there is love waiting for you, Ivory said, looking at him with eyes that said there was hope. She knew that Tonks was his true love and that she would be his love again. Even if there wasn't a war, they would find one another. I don't think so, Remus said, shaking his head sadly. He just knew that he was doomed to spend his life alone. You know me, Remus, I only speak the truth. I promise, there is love ahead for you. All it takes is for you to open your heart. Ivory said gently. She took his hand, tracing the lines on his palm, stopping where his love line crossed his fate line. Look here, she pointed. Within the next 2 years, someone will enter your life. She will be younger than you, and you will resist, at first. But if you allow yourself to be open, you will find love, she repeated, her voice full of conviction. He looked at her and searched her face looking for deception. He saw only the truth. He smiled a timid smile. Thank you, Ivory, he said, taking his hand back and slowly leaving the room. He had a lot to think about. HP. Harry was sitting at dinner with his friends, when Luna turned to him and said, Harry, if the headmaster calls you to his office, I want you to go to the nearest Flow and Call Street Mungo's and get your godfather. Who is his godfather? Ron asked, looking between the two. He had never heard of the man before. Won't he be healing? Harry asked, ignoring Ron for the moment. He did. Want to take Sirius away from getting better if he didn't have to. Well, yes, but he will be fine. His healing isn't life-threatening. He can take a break now and then. He will come and then go back, Luna said, patting his arm in reassurance. Who is his godfather? Ron asked again. Harry, you don't have a godfather, Hermione pointed out. Yeah, I do. It seems that Sirius Black is my godfather, Harry said, picking up his fork and resuming his meal of shepherd's pie. He knew that news was going to cause some chaos among the student body, but he didn't care. He had family for the first time in his life. And he was going to enjoy it. The revelation drew a chorus of shocked reactions, with one startled scream echoing from the cluster of students nearby. Neville's fork clattered to his plate, while Lavender immediately leaned into Parvati, eager to share the latest gossip. Don't be foolish, Sirius Black can't be your godfather, Hermione said, waving that thought away. I'm telling you, he is, Harry said, glaring at her. If Luna said he was, he believed her. Remus had been walking by, lost in thought about his love life, and decided to put an end to the argument. Harry is correct. Sirius is his godfather, he told the girl. He shook his head and moved on. He was still thinking about what Ivory had told him earlier. Why do you have to argue about everything? Ron asked Hermione, his eyes glaring daggers at her. I could ask the same of you, she snapped, and they were off again. Harry, promise me that if the headmaster asks you to his office, you'll go to Lupin or Moonblossom and have them call Black. Luna insisted, tugging at his sleeve. Okay, I promise, Harry replied, still uncertain why it mattered so much, but determined to honor his word, even if it meant dodging a teacher to do it. I don't know why you were listening to her, Hermione said, breaking from her argument with Ron. There is nothing nefarious about the headmaster. Then surely there's an issue with me having a guardian present, Harry replied with a casual shrug. He decided not to argue further with her. It was pointless, as she rarely listened unless someone echoed her own opinions. Hermione simply huffed and turned her attention back to her meal, resuming her argument with Ron. Luna watched the two of them squabble and smiled knowingly. She understood that their constant disagreement stemmed from a deep care for one another, even if they wouldn't admit it. Turning to Harry, Luna felt certain that, someday, her relationship with him would grow into something more. For now, though, she was content to wait. Over the course of a month, Dumbledore worked tirelessly behind the scenes to stop Sirius from becoming Harry's guardian. Despite his efforts, he was unsuccessful. Cornelius Fudge, eager to avoid a lawsuit against the Ministry for wrongful imprisonment, went out of his way to appease Sirius. The minister quickly granted guardianship of Harry to Sirius, and nothing Dumbledore said could reverse the decision. Undeterred, the headmaster decided to try a new tactic. He would focus his efforts on influencing Harry directly. Harry, come to my office after classes today, the old man said one day at breakfast, coming up to the Gryffindor table as the meal of oatmeal and fruit was about to end. He caused quite a stir by doing so, since he rarely left the staff table to mingle with the students. Okay, headmaster, Harry said, nodding amicably. He ate the last of his oatmeal and got up to go to divinations. Very well, my boy, I would like for you to know that I enjoy chocolate frogs this month, he added, winking at the teenager. He then whistled as he walked away like he did this every day. He nodded to the other students and went out of the Great Hall to do whatever it was he did during the day. What does that even mean? Harry asked, watching the old man leave. He looked at his friends, who all looked as clueless as he was. It means that's the password for the gargoyles, Luna explained, resting her hand gently on Harry's arm. She added, and don't forget to tell Ivory about your meeting. Luna was uneasy about Harry meeting Dumbledore alone. Not because she thought he'd do anything sinister, but because she suspected the headmaster might try to persuade Harry into making a rash decision. She also worried that Dumbledore could use a bit of magic. Perhaps a subtle compulsion charm, to influence Harry's choices, convinced that such a nudge wouldn't really do any harm. Thank you, Luna. I will, Harry replied, slinging his book bag over his shoulder as he left the table. He gave her a quick peck on the cheek and then he headed to class with Ron and Hermione, where they continued working with tarot cards. The assignment required them to memorize the entire deck to fully grasp how to interpret the readings. They were nearly finished with the lower deck, having already completed the upper cards. Are you really going to let Professor Moonblossom know about the meeting? Hermione asked as she shuffled the tarot deck. Although she hadn't expected to enjoy the class, she found the tarot readings surprisingly engaging. While Hermione didn't necessarily believe the cards could foretell the future, she was intrigued by how people allowed them to influence their decisions and daily routines. I don't think I will have to, Harry said, nodding at the teacher who was staring at him in a knowing fashion. It was as if the woman already knew. Mr. Potter, see me after class, the teacher said kindly as she came to their table. Yes, Professor, Harry replied, carefully laying out the cards in a 3-card spread. The cards he drew were the 3 of Wands, the 10 of Cups, and the 6 of Coins. Reaching for the reference book, he began flipping through the pages, looking up the meanings of each card. As he found the relevant passages, Harry diligently took notes on what each card represented. Very good, Ivory said, looking at his cards and nodding. She moved on and went to the next table. Harry's tarot reading was a positive one. It suggested the end of a project, the arrival of happiness, and the opportunity to share his prosperity. He found comfort in the message and couldn't help but wonder who he might share his good fortune with. Glancing at Ron, Harry hoped it would be his friend. Ron could really use a new wand, and maybe even a pet. Harry glanced at Hermione's cards and saw they indicated worry and change, most of them showing up reversed. He worried that she might be involved in something that could end up hurting her. Lately, he'd noticed Hermione seemed stressed and irritable. She would vanish and show up again without warning, offering flimsy excuses for her absences but refusing to explain what was really going on. He really hoped that she would tell them soon, because she was going to burn herself out. Ron's tarot spread was chaotic, the cards delivering conflicting messages of both loyalty and betrayal. It was clear that Ron felt as perplexed by the reading as Harry did, struggling to make sense of the mixed signals. When class ended, Harry sent his friends on and went to the front of the class. "The headmaster wants to see me after classes," he told Ivory without preamble. "I will call Sirius," she told him, nodding her head. She would do this as soon as he left. She had time between classes. "Run along now. And I will get right on it," she said, making shooing motions. "Yes, ma'am," Harry said as he left the room, trusting her to handle things. It was reassuring to have an adult he could count on. And he hoped he would be able to rely on Sirius in the same way. He also thought about Professor Lupin, but there was something about the man that made Harry uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lupin was keeping secrets from him. He just looked shifty around him. Ivory stepped over to the floor and contacted Street Mungo's, speaking directly with the reception nurse. "Cool. Do you please arrange for Sirius Black to come to Hogwarts in approximately 5 hours? He's needed for a family meeting with his ward and the headmaster," she requested, once she got the woman's attention. "Lord Black is undergoing therapy. He should not be gallivanting around the wizarding world," the nurse said, consulting her clipboard. "He needs to." "I understand the protocols," Ivory interrupted, stopping the nurse before she could continue her explanation. "But his presence is essential, otherwise, things could get out of hand. As a seer, I assure you I know what I am talking about." Her voice was steady and reassuring. "He will only be here for an hour, 2 at the most, and then he will return directly," she added, hoping to calm the nurse's concerns. "Very well, I'll see that he is told that he is needed. Whether he comes is up to him," the nurse said, tapping her quill on the clipboard and turning away. "Thank you," Ivory said, taking her head out of the flow. She then went out setting up her classroom for her next class. HP. An hour before dinner, Harry waited for Sirius, whom he had yet to meet, in front of the gargoyles. A few minutes later, a dapper man came up to him. Dressed in some fine-looking clothes. He looked like the man from the papers, but cleaner. "Sirius?" Harry asked, holding out his hand. His hand was shaking a bit, he was so nervous. "Harry." Sirius returned, taking the hand. His hand was shaking too. He hoped Harry forgave him for leaving him as a baby, but that was a conversation for another time. Now they had to face the headmaster. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Harry said, sighing in relief. "Luna told me not to go up there alone," he told him. "I'm not sure why, but she said you'd understand." He was glad the man was there, even if he did look like he should be in bed. Sirius appeared pale and drawn, his hands trembling slightly. Despite this, he had come for Harry, which filled Harry with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was grateful to have another adult supporting him, yet distressed that Sirius was pushing himself while clearly unwell. "I do," Sirius said, looking at the gargoyles. "Do you know the password?" He cussed silently in his head for not getting it from Ivory. He should have called her on the flow. It would have given him a reason to talk to her. He really wanted to thank her for arranging this and to just talk to her. She was an amazing woman. "Chocolate frogs," Harry said to the stone gargoyles. Instantly, they sprang aside, allowing both him and Sirius to ascend the stairs to the office. They were invited in, at least Harry was. Sirius, however, followed right behind him without waiting for an invitation. In the room were Albus Dumbledore and Severus Snape. To say they were surprised to see Sirius was an understatement. Sirius, what are you doing here? I thought you were in the hospital, Albus said, shock evident on his face. Inside he was cursing up a storm. This was the last person he wanted to see. A little bird told me you wanted to see Harry, so I took the time out to come and see why, Sirius said, taking a much-needed seat and waving for Harry to join him. He looked pointedly at the old man. Like he knew exactly why Albus wanted Harry here. Would this bird be named Moonblossom or Lupin? Snape asked, glaring at Sirius like he had done something wrong. None of your business. Why are you here? This is supposed to be a visit between the headmaster and Harry. You are not his head of house, or his guardian, Sirius said, looking between the two men. He never understood why Snape was around the headmaster all the time. What role did he play in this meeting? Severus has my deepest confidence, Dumbledore said, like that explained everything. He needed Snape here to intimidate Harry into doing what he wanted. If he got Harry mad enough, then the boy would make mistakes. That and Severus could read Harry's memories of the boy's time at the Dursleys, and Albus would know the truth about what happened in that house. He could use that in his dealings with the teen. That still doesn't explain why he is here now, Sirius said, waving that reason away. He is my confidant, Albus explained. Then went on to say, Harry, I wanted to explain to you why you must stay at the Dursleys. He turned to Harry with earnest eyes. He would make his plea and hope for the best. That is not going to happen, Sirius said, cutting him off. He knew that was the reason for this visit and he was going to stop it from happening. Sirius, you have to realize that powerful wards are placed there to safeguard the family. The old man said, massaging his long nose as though weary. Did they protect Harry better than the Fidelius? Sirius asked, leaning forward. He had every intention of putting that charm up when he got a place for them to live. Well, no, Albus said, slowly. But the Dursleys will be vulnerable. Do you not want to protect your family? He asked Harry. He would play on the boy's loyalty. Surely. He loved his family enough to keep them safe. They are not my family, Harry said, with great conviction. His face turned to stone and his voice was cold. Harry, my boy, what a thing to say, Albus said. Leaning back as if slapped. He knew that Harry wasn't happy there, but to say that, well, that wasn't what he was expecting. You didn't live with them. They made it perfectly clear we were not family. Harry informed him. It was never home to me, he added, unknowingly making the blood wards fall. A trinket behind Albus's desk stopped working, unnoticed to everyone besides the headmaster. The old man sighed and started thinking about how he could salvage this situation. We're done here, Sirius said, getting up and motioning Harry to do the same. Harry will live with me. The Dursleys will have to fend for themselves. He was already trying to think about where they would live. He could always go to Grimmauld Place, but he'd have to clean it up first. But I made a promise to them. Dumbledore said, frantically. He knew the wards were not effective anymore, but hopefully he could re-establish them, or some like them. That's not our problem. We didn't make a promise, Sirius said. Turning to leave. Come on, Harry. I want to talk to you for a minute before I leave, he said, going to the door. All right, Sirius, Harry said, getting up to follow him. Harry, do you truly hate your family that much? Dumbledore asked, trying one more time. I don't want them dead, but I won't lift a finger to protect them, Harry pronounced, heading out of the office. I am only showing them the same courtesy they showed me, he said as he closed the door. Did they really treat you that badly? Sirius asked him as they went down the stairs. This meeting just made him feel that much worse than he already felt. They were abusive, Harry confessed with a shrug. Not so much physically, but mentally and verbally, yeah. He didn't know why he was telling Sirius this. He had never told anyone else about it. Not even Ron and Hermione. I know how you feel, Sirius stated, looking at him sideways. My mum was a bitch too. He gave him a self-depreciative smile. Oh, was all Harry could say to that. Come on, let's go find Ivory and thank her. Then we'll have that talk, Sirius said, heading down the hall to find the woman in question. Okay, Harry said, following along. He wondered what they were going to talk about but decided that it must be important or Sirius wouldn't come from his hospital bed to have it. They didn't have to find Ivory, she found them. They were wandering through the halls, and she came up to them on the 7th floor. It was near a tapestry of a man teaching trolls to dance. "Oh good, I knew I would find you here," she said. And started pacing in front of a stretch of blank wall. "What's she doing?" Harry whispered to Sirius as he watched her. She seemed to know what she was doing, but it confused the two males. Sirius just shrugged and watched Ivory pace, and he was shocked when a door appeared a few seconds later. "Wow," he said, leaning against the wall to keep upright. He was still unwell. He had been all over this castle when he was a student here and he had never found this door. "Come on, quickly," Ivory urged, moving to assist Sirius as they entered the newly conjured room. Inside, the space was inviting, featuring 3 plush armchairs gathered around a cozy fireplace. Several small tables dotted the room, complementing a soft, elegant rug. Against the right wall stood a bookcase filled with a handful of thick volumes, while the left wall was adorned with a framed picture of Hogwarts. "Here, now, Sirius, you rest a bit. You have had a long night." She guided him into one of the chairs. "Yeah," Sirius said, staring at her with goofy eyes. He really did adore her. "Professor, what is this room?" Harry asked, taking another of the chairs. "This is the room of requirements," Ivory said, settling in the last chair. "It can be anything you want it to be. I want a comfortable place to talk." She looked the door and said, "Oh, phoo, I should have known to make 4 chairs." And conjured a 4th chair as the door opened and Luna came in. "Luna," Harry said, jumping up and running to her. He moved to the 4th chair, but Luna didn't sit. "Dinner is starting," she said, coming into the room. She looked at Sirius and smiled and bobbed her head. "Mr. Black," she said. "They will survive without us," Ivory said, waving her away. She didn't see any reason for them to join the rest of the school. She wanted to talk to Sirius, and the 2 kids could hear what she had to say. "Harry's friends will fuss," Luna warned her, not taking the seat. She, on the other hand, knew that Hermione and Ron would create a commotion if Harry wasn't there. They might even tell the teachers that Harry was doing something dangerous. "Very well, Harry, why don't you join your friends, and I will talk to you another time," Ivory said, nodding to the 2 youngest people there. She didn't want to draw attention to herself via Harry's friends. Not that she couldn't talk her way out of it, but Luna was right, why bother? "Okay," Harry said, going to Sirius and giving him a hug. "I'll see you later, Sirius. Get better, yeah." He was glad he finally got to meet the man and was doubly glad he now had 2 adults that would stand up for him. "Okay, Harry, you behave, and play as many pranks as you can," the dogman said, not getting up. He gave Harry a wicked grin when he looked at Luna, but Harry missed the implications as he took her hand and led her from the room. Luna and Harry left, the boy being very confused, while Sirius was left behind, also looking just as befuddled. "I wanted to talk to him," he said as he watched Harry leave. "You will have ample time," Ivory predicted, adjusting her skirts. "I wanted to talk to you. I feel someone must know who I am, where I come from and why I am here. I chose you for that task." She studied his expression carefully, searching for any sign of how he was reacting to the news. "I knew there was something special about you," Sirius said, sitting up and paying attention to her. "Lay it on me," he said, repeating a phrase he had heard a Muggleborn say in his time. "I am from the future," she said, bluntly. She didn't feel the need to sugarcoat it. Sirius sat stunned for around 20 seconds and then started laughing. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said, then he sobered. There were only few reasons people would come back in time and none of them good. "Was it that bad?" he asked, seeing the look on her face. Ivory looked at him with a somber face. "Yes, and it should have been Harry who came back, but he could not. I am here, and I need your help," she said, fidgeting in her seat. "You see, we were betrayed in the future by someone we thought was a friend. He was Muggleborn, so we trusted him blindly. You would not know him. You are dead in the future. I will not tell you when you passed, for I plan on keeping you alive as long as possible," she said, glaring at him as if daring him to defy her. Again, Sirius was quiet for quite some time. Then he looked serious, and said, "Why Harry? What is his role in all this? He is just a boy." He didn't want it to be true. He had just got the boy back and didn't want to lose him to some quirk of fate. Then again, she said he was alive in the future. As for his dying, he wanted to know, but then again, he didn't. He planned on staying alive for a long time. He is the pivotal figure in all of this. First, he was the boy who lived, and later, he became the man who won, she explained, rolling her eyes when Sirius scoffed at the titles. Still, everyone admired him. He was the public's hero. The one who understood everything happening around us. My knowledge comes from what he shared with me. After we defeated the Dark Lord, inexplicably, the Death Eaters were released. They returned in full force, quickly seizing control of the wizarding world, even without their leader. Lucius Malfoy stepped into that position, and it was a living nightmare. The look on her face showed that she was in no way lying. I don't see Lucy stepping into that role, Sirius said, shaking his head in disbelief. The Lucius he knew was a coward. He always followed and never led. Ivory nodded her head firmly and said, once he saw that he got away with it again, he knew he was more powerful than those that were in charge. So, he gladly took advantage of it. He was ruthless. In the end, he was worse than Voldemort. The ones in power didn't learn from this. Sirius asked, tilting his head. No, they still gave them second chances. They didn't want conflict. We had to kill on sight and were proclaimed the enemy. Ivory said, shaking her head. It was a sad state of affairs. This person who betrayed you, who was it? Sirius asked, wanting to know so he could have Harry avoid them. Justin Finch Fletchley. Ivory said in a whisper. We were all caught by surprise. He was such a sweet boy and a nice man. He was the kindest person we had ever known. We still do not know why or how he turned. It still hurt even after all this time. When she saw that innocent child in her class, she just wanted to weep. Could he have been magicked? Sirius asked, taking her hand at the pain on her face. Ivory took a deep breath and shook her head. No, we checked. He did it of his own free will. That had been the most devastating part of all. Sirius was quiet again, not sure what to say. Well, that future is gone, he said, moving on. We'll try to save him. What can I do now? He patted her hand and squeezed it, hoping to give her some comfort. First, you need to recover, she insisted, brushing her tears away and settling in her chair. After that, your priority must be to protect Harry. Then, together, we have to begin the search for the Horcruxes. Dropping that bombshell, she knew he would not take that news well and she had more to tell him that he would not like. Sirius exploded from his chair. Horcruxes. He knew what they were, of course. Not even his family would use them. Dark as they were. Yes. Voldemort created 6 of them, not including the one in Harry, Ivory said, trying to remain calm. I know where they are and how to get them, she added, hoping that would relieve some of his worry. It didn't. There's one in Harry, Sirius exclaimed in a questioning tone as he prowled the room. This was a nightmare. It couldn't be happening. There was only one way to get rid of those abominations, and that was to destroy it. Ivory got up and stood in front of him and put her hands on his chest. We can get it out of him, without killing him, she assured him. How? He asked, searching her face for the truth. It's a simple ritual. Hermione invented it for just this purpose, she stated. It was the one concession the woman would do. She said if they were going to do this folly, then they might as well get the Horcrux out of Harry, and she invented the ritual. Fret not, your godson will live. He need not die this time. Good, good, that's good, Sirius said, sagging in relief. He smiled at her. When can we do that? And what do you mean, this time? That threw him for a loop. Had they had to kill Harry last time? But she said that Harry was alive. That didn't make sense. Samhain. It is in a week, she told him. Can you come? She ignored his other question. That was not her story to tell, and if she had it her way it would not happen. I'll be here, he informed her. He could tell she wasn't going to answer his other question, so he moved on. You never did tell me who you are, he said, smiling at her. He had guessed, but he wanted to tease her. She just smiled at him and looked at him vacantly. You know who I am, she said airily. That little girl that was here earlier. I don't know her name though, he reminded her. The resemblance was uncanny. He was surprised that no one else had guessed so far. Oh, silly me. That was Luna Lovegood, Ivory said, giggling like a little girl. And yes, she is me. You are both very beautiful, he said, taking her hands and kissing them. You, of course, are far more lovely. She is but a child. He would never look at a younger girl in that manner. Ivory was more than enough woman for him. Thank you. But we have far more important things to worry about than my beauty, Ivory stated, withdrawing her hands. She was flattered, and could easily fall for his sweet talk, but they had to think about the Horcruxes and Harry. Yes, I must get back, Sirius said, moving back and reluctantly letting go of her hands. But when this is over, I want a chance to win your hand. He gave her a saucy smile and a wink. We will see, she said, blushing a bit. That is not a no, Sirius said, going to the flow in the room and throwing the powder in the fire. He called the Saint Mungo's address and the fire turned green. I'll see you soon, lovely lady. And he was gone. That you will, Sirius Black, that you will, Ivory stated, leaving the room. Her mind was racing with the things they had to do. HP. Harry and Luna joined the rest of the school for dinner. When they got to the Gryffindor table, Hermione asked, what did the headmaster want? None of your business, Harry said, taking a seat and serving himself up some beef Wellington. I beg your pardon, Hermione said, shocked that Harry would say that to her. He had never declined to tell her anything before. I said, it is none of your business. He repeated, taking a bite of his meal. What happened in that office was between him, Sirius and the other two men. Though he still didn't know why Snape was there. Harry James Potter. Tell me why the headmaster wanted to talk to you, the bushy-haired witch demanded, putting her fork down forcefully. No, Harry said, turning away from her and starting a conversation with Ron about Quidditch. Ron looked at him funny but went along with him and continued the talk about the sport. He kept glancing between Harry and Hermione like she was going to explode, but she Jew. Saint started at Harry like he had struck her in the face. Harry, Hermione tried tentatively, why won't you tell me what is going on? Because it is none of your business, Harry said for the third time. But, she said, looking lost. She had no idea why she was so irritable lately, but she was getting so little sleep and there was so much homework to do. She just couldn't help snapping at her friends. She really needed to control that impulse. Look, we're friends, but that doesn't mean you get to know everything about my life. In this case, it is not your affair, Harry said, trying to keep his cool. I don't ask you for every detail about your life. And I know you're keeping secrets this year. Until you tell me everything, I'll keep my secrets, thank you very much, he stated, turning back to his conversation with Ron. However, Ron wasn't playing this time. What secrets? He asked, turning to Hermione. Nothing, Hermione said, quickly, grasping something in her shirt. You've made my point, Harry said. Going back to his meal and this time starting a conversation with Luna about the Nargles and what they had to say about Sirius. Oh, I think that Samhain will be interesting this year, she said. Looking at the ceiling. Oh, do you know why? Harry asked, not sure what Samhain was. Let's just say your passenger will be going bye-bye, Luna said, looking at him dreamily. Luna, that doesn't make any sense. Harry whinged at her. Don't fret, Harry, it's all for the good. Trust your godfather and Ivory, Luna told him and started making a castle with her mashed potatoes. She started humming to herself, effectively stopping the conversation. Okay, Luna, Harry said, with a puzzled look on his face. He continued eating his meal as he took in the talk around him. He would do as she said. And trust the two adults, but that didn't mean he wouldn't worry. What passenger? Samhain came on them quickly and it was time to rid Harry of the Horcrux. Ivory had Harry stay aft class that day to sit him down and explain to him what was going to happen that night. He sat across from her and waited for her to begin. Harry, I want you to know that we are going to perform a ritual on you to make the passenger in your forehead leave tonight, she said in that airy way of hers. Luna said the same thing, but what passenger? Harry asked, befuddled. He had racked his brain, trying to figure out what the younger girl had been talking about but couldn't come up with any explanation. You have a fragment of Voldemort's soul embedded in your scar, Ivory explained gently. Normally, the headmaster believes the only way to remove it is for you to die. But I know a ritual that can accomplish the same thing without that sacrifice. She paused, then added, do not judge him too harshly. He truly does not know of any other solution. As far as anyone is aware, death is the only proven method to eliminate such a soul fragment. I don't know whether to be angry or relieved, Harry said. His fists clenched in frustration. I am mortified that such a thing is in my head, he confessed, shock evident on his face. You can get it out of me, right? He practically begged. Yes, Harry, we will tonight. Meet me here around midnight, she instructed, getting up and ushering him to the door. She had to get ready for her next class and he was already late for Transfigurations. She gave him a note for McGonagall and sent him on his way. All right, he said, gripping the note tightly as he left the room. The conversation with Ivory weighed heavily on his mind, leaving him distracted and detached from everything happening around him for the rest of the day. Even the lively Samhain feast couldn't shake him out of his daze. Later, lying in bed, he watched the seconds crawl by on his watch, waiting for the appointed hour. When midnight approached, he quietly got up, slipped on his invisibility cloak, and made his way to the divinations classroom, where Ivory and Sirius were already waiting for him. Good, you are on time, Ivory said, coming up to him and hugging him tightly. It was an unusual display of affection for her, but she was worried about him tonight. This was an untested ritual, and she was not as sure of herself as she let on. I'm so glad you're here, Sirius told him, taking his turn to hug him. How are you feeling? I'm worried, Harry confessed, returning his hug. He had no clue as to what was going to happen, but Luna had told him to trust these two adults, so he was going to. Don't worry, we'll get you straightened out and get that Horcrux out of you, Sirius said, leading him further into the room. He was just as concerned as Harry. He had never heard of this ritual and was nervous about doing it. Ivory gently took Harry's hand and guided him toward the intricate circle at the center of the classroom. You'll need to lie in the very middle of the pentagram, she instructed softly. Keep your head at the top and make sure you don't disturb any of the lines. The circle, expansive and ornate, featured a striking star at its heart, surrounded by meticulously drawn runes. Harry did as he was bid and carefully stepped over the markings and laid down on the floor with his head at the top of the star. He felt foolish at first, then was overcome by a sense of serenity. It was as if all the thoughts cleared from his head and all he felt was trust. He relaxed and sighed in relief, knowing that everything was going to be okay. Ivory meticulously completed the protective circle, taking care to ensure every line was perfectly intact before she began to chant in a low, rhythmic voice. Sirius joined her, and together they started to move Widdershins around the ritual circle, their steps synchronized in a deliberate, ceremonial fashion. 7 black candles stood sentinel at equal intervals around the perimeter. At the very top of the circle, just above Harry's head, sat a ceramic bowl cradling a clear crystal, half full of acid. The ritual spell they were about to cast would draw the Horcrux from Harry's scar and into the crystal. Ivory and Sirius continued their chant, moving gracefully as they traced intricate patterns with their wands. Their voices rang out with certainty, building in strength as the ritual reached its climax. Suddenly, Harry's body arched, and he cried out in pain as his scar split open. The Horcrux burst forth from his forehead, shooting into the ceramic bowl and embedding itself in the crystal. Instantly, the crystal turned pitch black and emitted a piercing scream before cracking and falling silent. The acid had done its job. Gasping, Harry sat up abruptly and scrambled backward, shaken by what had just occurred. Do not leave the circle yet, Ivory warned him, going to the edge of the pentagram and breaking the circle with her boot, so that he could safely leave. There, now you can come out, she told him. Harry gladly did so, shaking badly. That was like the diary, he said, pointing at the crystal. What diary? Sirius asked, looking at him, disturbed that his godson had faced another of these abominations. Why had he not heard of this? He had been around long enough to have heard if his godson had been in danger. Moony should have told him at the very least. Last year, there was this diary that I destroyed to save Ginny Weasley from being possessed by it. I had to face a basilisk and stab the diary to finally get rid of it, Harry explained, his whole body trembling at the memory. Let me get this straight. You, a 12-year-old, faced a basilisk, killed it, and destroyed a Horcrux. While saving the girl? Sirius asked, both proud and angry. He was very upset that Harry was the one telling him, and that he had been put in danger in the first place. What the hell was going on in this school? Yeah, that's right, but there wasn't anyone else at the time. Me and Ron were the only ones that knew where she was, Harry said, rubbing his nose. Well, we tried to take Lockhart. But he double-crossed us and wound up jinxing himself with Ron's wonky wand. He laughed at that memory. That's when he realized that Ron didn't need a new wand. His parents had bought him one this summer. He could use a new pet though. That doesn't excuse the adults for dropping that quaffle. You should have never have been there in the first place. You're not responsible for anyone's life but your own. You're far too young for that, Sirius said, hugging him close. He was going to have words with Dumbledore. But, I'm fine now, Harry said, hugging him back. He didn't dare tell him that he had been bitten. He just knew that would cause the man to worry more. You very nearly were not, Ivory said gently, lifting his sleeve to reveal the scar left by the bite. You almost died, Harry. Do not pretend it was not difficult for you. You need to talk to someone about your experiences at Hogwarts. Bottling it up is not healthy, she advised him. She knew he didn't want Sirius to know. But the man needed to understand all the boy had been through to better protect him. Harry looked away, ashamed of how weak he felt at the moment. He thought that he should be braver and surer of himself. I'm fine, he said again, even though he felt anything but. Oh, Harry, Sirius said, hugging him again. He knew what the boy was going through. He had gone through the same thing when he was 16. Feeling weak and unsure. Just remember I am here for you when you are ready to talk. I have been through some shite, so I can relate. Probably not the same shite you have been through. But I have been to Azkaban and let me tell you that place is hell on earth, he told him. He looked Harry in the face, making sure the boy could see that he was telling him the truth and could see that there was empathy there and not pity. Harry straightened and looked at his godfather. He knew then that he had found a kindred spirit. He would tell this man what had been going on in this school and how it made him feel. He had been bottling it up for far too long. Ivory felt relieved that Sirius and Harry had finally connected. Now, with their bond, they could support one another and share what they couldn't before. She sensed her own role in their lives was secure, and that filled her with contentment. Gently shifting the conversation, she said, Sirius, we should discuss the Horcruxes that remain. Her words broke the heartfelt silence. However, she knew that the time for that discussion wasn't quite right. They would address it soon enough, just not yet. Harry, why don't you go back to bed? Sirius said, not wanting him involved. He wanted to talk to Harry, but they had plenty of time for that. He would come by tomorrow and demand to spend time with the teen. Can I help? Harry asked, looking between the two adults. He felt that it was his responsibility to do something. How? You are a student still in school, Sirius said as gently as possible. You have classes and are bound to stay in the castle. You can't go wandering around the United Kingdom looking for random items that you know who might have used. He tried to be kind, but he knew no matter how gentle he was, it wasn't going to be enough. Harry would feel sidelined. I suppose, Harry conceded, nodding in agreement. He really didn't know how he could help. Still, he felt left out and discarded. If you can help, I will come to you, Sirius compromised, knowing that that would be the best. I don't know how, but if you can, I will, he promised. All right, Harry said, going to leave. He stopped when Ivory's voice broke the silence. Harry, keep close to Luna. She is going to need you, she said, her tone flat. She had that dreamy look on her face again. Why? What is going to happen? Harry asked, worried about his friend. Nothing dangerous, just some bullies again. I think you will be needed, Ivory stated, blinking and shaking her head. She looked at Harry like she had no clue she had spoken. Good night, Harry said, smiling at the two adults. He knew Ivory wouldn't remember what she had just said, so he would just bid her farewell and follow her advice. Good night, Harry, Ivory said. Smiling back. Take care, Harry, Sirius said, waving to the boy. He had no clue what had just happened but didn't let it bother him. He figured it was between Harry and Ivory. After Harry left, Ivory straightened the room with a wave of her wand. The circle disappeared and the candles snuffed out and went into a box. A flick of her wand, and the bowl was on her desk in the front of the room. Another swish and the desks were where they belonged. It was as if the classroom was never used for the ritual. She settled at one of the desks and gestured for Sirius to take another. I know where the others are. She told him. I have one here in the classroom. You have one in your house, and one in Bellatrix's vault. There is one in Little Hangleton, and one yet created. She counted them off on her fingers. Harry, like he said, killed one last year. There's one in Grimmauld Place. Sirius asked, dumbfounded. He had no idea how that happened. His family hated Horcruxes. They thought them to be evil and not even his dark family would use them. Yes, your house elf has been trying to destroy it for over 12 years. Your brother died trying to rid the world of the Dark Lord, she informed him. Taking his hand. Reggie? Sirius asked, his throat closing. He just couldn't imagine it. He had thought his brother had died a Death Eater. That is right. Regulus discovered that Voldemort had made at least one Horcrux and tried to destroy it. Unfortunately, he fell into a trap during his attempt. He asked Kreacher to destroy it, but the elf was unable to do so, she explained gently. Giving his hand a comforting pat. She understood the truth would be painful for him but believed it was important for his healing in the long run. Well, we can get rid of 3, easily. But the one in Gringotts will be difficult and the one yet created is going to be a hard one. If we kill these, will that prevent you-know-who from coming back? Sirius asked, hope in his voice. That is my hope, Ivory said. Not knowing if it was true. She couldn't see it. Some things were clouded to her. She did see a bright future for herself and Harry, so she thought it might be true. She got up and removed the diadem from its hiding place and dropped it in the bowl of acid with the crystal. A loud scream was heard and the diadem cracked and tarnished. Isn't that Ravenclaw's lost diadem? Sirius asked, grabbing for it, but stopping before he could touch it. It looked like it would burn him if he tried. It was, she said, waving her wand and banishing the whole bowl. A shame that that had to happen, he said. Shaking his head sadly. He used Founder's items for many of his Horcruxes, she said, just as sadly. Why didn't you use the ritual for the diadem? He asked, looking at her queerly. He would have thought she would have wanted to save a treasure like that. It only works on the living, she informed him. The ritual had to have a conscience to push out the soul piece. The items didn't have that. I understand, Sirius replied, stifling a yawn. I should head back before anyone realizes I'm gone. He stood up, gently kissed her on the cheek and walked over to the flow. I'll see you tomorrow. With that, he disappeared into the green flames. Ivory quietly hummed as she made her way to bed, feeling accomplished after a long day. She took pride in the fact that she had succeeded in destroying 2 Horcruxes, making the world a safer place. That's it for today, I will stop here. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you please consider subscribe and make sure to hit that like button, share with your friends and don't forget to check out author of this story. Details in description.